Kia ora koutou, good morning everyone. Thank you all for being here at this meeting of the Economic Growth Committee, Wednesday the 21st of June. Before we get into our regular proceedings, I'd like to start our meeting in karakia. Nā mihi o te rā, ki te whānau e hui hui nei, ki tau te rangimāri e, ki e whakatāpua, tātou, me nā mea, e whakaponau, ana tātou, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Kia ora, thank you. We'll start with the housekeeping. So this meeting will be recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. All online participants, can you please keep your cameras turned on and microphones mute? And I believe Councillor Finlay is joining us online today. Any councillors speaking or presenters, please just give your name before speaking to the microphone for those who are joining online. And as an unusual note for us here in the chamber, our speaker queue seems to have just jumped back on, so we should be all right to use that. We were about to have to vote off or get in the queue off the hand, so that's been avoided. Quick health and safety. In the case of fire or emergency, on hearing the alarm, please exit through your nearest fire exit. We've got those to the door there and out through the main lobby, and evacuate the assembly area, the clock tower, and Te Marae o Hine, the square. For health and safety, smoking is prohibited in this building, and we have a defibrillator located at front of house on the ground floor across the road. Please report any near misses or incidents to our committee administrators. With that, we'll move to apologies. I have a few, so I'll move that we receive the apologies from Councillor Leonie Harpiter and Lorna Johnson, as well as early departure from Councillor McCullard and late arrival from Councillor Bowen. I'll look for a seconder. The Mayor. Any others? In that case, we'll vote. That has passed, 11 votes for, none against. Notification of additional items, I have none. Declarations of interest, are there any from the floor? Seeing none, we'll carry on. Public comment, I've received no notice of any, so we'll move on from that as well. To confirmation of the minutes. So I'd like to resolve that the minutes from the Economic Growth Committee meeting of 12th of April 2023, Part 1 Public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. Could I have a seconder? The Mayor. Any matters arising? In that case, we shall vote. Everybody double check they've voted. There we go. That has passed, 11 votes for and none against. So now we will move on to receiving or hearing from the Palmerston North Airport. Welcome to our guests here in the chamber today. So we have Steve Patterson presenting. Just let everybody get to their seats before we begin. Right, welcome to the chamber. The floor's yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and elected members. And I have representatives from the airport board and management here who will be the ones who primarily answer any questions you have. But I thought, aside from taking the report as read, I just wanted to make a couple of very brief introductory comments. The Council, through its investment policy, states that it holds this investment in the airport company to meet strategic, economic and transport objectives. That's the main reason the council's holds the investment. The airport company, as a CCTO, has come to us with its draft. You've made comments back to them, as outlined in the background in the report. They've considered those, addressed them, and responded to each of those in terms of the final report, the SOI that they've brought to you here. They've explained the reasons for what they've done. They've responded in terms of providing the long-term projections that you sought to try to demonstrate the position over 10 years. We've known, all of us, that they're embarking on a long-signalled period of significant capital expenditure. Interest rates have moved a little, and so that makes that slightly more challenging, but they've used the connection through the council to help moderate those interest rate rises. You've sought from the company the requirement to be able to begin to start paying a dividend again, and they've addressed that issue specifically, and as they've commented, that there's a trade-off in doing that, and they've outlined the implications of that for them and for the council. I just thought I'd mention as well, in terms of the report with the level of capital investment that is required, they haven't come to the council at this point seeking any additional capital, and it was back in 2007, in fact, that the council last made any capital contribution to the airport, and prior to that in 2006, when the council decided that it was appropriate to buy out the minority shareholder there was at the time, so that the council would become the sole shareholder for the business. So with those introductory remarks, Mr. Chair, we're open for questions.
Thank you, Steve. Have we got any questions from councillors? Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, and thank you for the report and being here today. I've got a few questions. The first one just relates to the terminal development plan. On page 24, it talks about, the improved passenger experience, but it also talks about a part of that investment is about providing for potential reintroduction of jet services. And I'm just wondering, of that 40 million investment, how much of that approximately is specifically around preparing the terminal for jet services?
Good morning. The major driver of the size of the terminal relates to projected growth in passenger numbers. So it's agnostic in terms of whether that's jets or additional turboprops. Jets would require screening, so passenger and hold bag screening. So that could be a driver of this project. But also in the background, as we've signalled in previous years, there is potential that regional airports are required to introduce regional screening for passengers and hold bag. So if you accept that there's possibly two drivers of screening, the baggage makeup area is the major area that's required for screening, and it's around, I think, 1,500 square metres. And I would imagine probably the cost of that is around 5 million or so when you consider the equipment that goes in there. Within the terminal itself, you will have screens up to separate passengers who are not screened, but that's a pretty marginal cost, so that the significant cost would be in the baggage makeup area. Okay,
thank you. And just looking at the updated, dividend policy, it's outlined on page 17 that that's anticipated to just be 20% net profit after tax. And my understanding is that it used to be 40%, but the 20% seems to have carried right through to the outer years, year 8, 9, 10. I'm just wondering why there's such a significant change from what has previously been the policy.
The 10-year projection model is one of many different scenarios that could play out over the 10 years. It's not necessarily how things will eventuate. It could be a 40% dividend. It could be 20%. It is has been prepared on the basis of demonstrating to yourselves that we, after the terminal lump, will be able to service debt and pay a reasonable dividend. There's no reason that could not go up. The consequences of doing so would mean more debt. So at the moment, I think it's about $31 million of debt by year 10. If we were to change that up to sort of 40% over that 10-year period, you're looking at about $40 million of debt. So another $7-8 million worth of debt would go on should the dividend double.
Okay, thank you. And just in the executive summary on page 23, it talks about the external investment that will be required. I'm just wondering, the return at the moment on investment appears to be very small, perhaps about a quarter or moving towards 0.5% of the overall asset. What do you think it's likely that an investor would be happy to invest with such a small level of return?
I'm assuming you're referring to commercial developments that occur in the future. In terms of the investment that we're seeking relates to standalone commercial projects, and so they will consider the project's returns, which are healthy. Certainly the warehouses that we're looking at are healthy.
Okay, so so the external investment required, so you're not talking about actual shares in the airport?
We could be. It's a different opportunity. But I guess when we wrote the SOI, we were specifically thinking about investors in unique projects. Yeah.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And perhaps just one more question, Mr. Chair, probably to officers. If we are we approving 3 years today? Or is there the option to approve less than 3 years if we do want to revisit anything in terms of the plans?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the way I see it is that a statement of intent normally covers a period of 3 years, as this does. The statement is reviewed each year, though, and come back to us each year. So it's not unlike, I suppose, the council with its longer-term horizon through the 10-year plan and an annual plan each year, just double-checking where we're at and I suppose reaffirming the direction. You would hope, though, that if there's to be a major investment made in year one, started, then to look to change direction. That's signalling a direction and really a commitment for something longer than just the first year, in a sense.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I might jump in with a few of my own questions here. So on page 14 of the Statement of Intent, which for councillors is page 35, in the cover letter it says that debt will remain elevated till financial year 29. Looking at the Statement of Financial Performance until 25, you're predicting you'll make a net profit after tax and after dividend payment of 7.4 million. I'm just trying to understand, if that 7.4 million isn't going toward debt payment, where is it going? That's page 35 on councillors' papers. Or page 14 for you.
Sorry, could you please repeat the question?
Of course. So you've put in on this page that you'll make a net profit after tax of $8.9 million, 1.5 million of which will be dividend payments, 7.4 million of which will be profit after tax and after dividend payments. Just trying to understand where that money will go if it's not going toward paying off debt.
towards the terminal cost and the other capital expenditure that is incurred over the next 3 years.
So it's being used, rather than leveraging debt for that price, being used as direct capital investment into the program. Is that
Yes,
correct?
it's being reinvested into the business to pay for the capital program, or to contribute towards the capital program.
Appreciate that clarification, thank you. Across the page, and this might be something that it's just me, but down the very bottom, you've got an item capital and reserves, with reserves of $36.4 million. I just want to understand what that means. I assume that's not just cash reserve sitting there.
No, that's an accounting calculation. It is the fair value gains on property, plant, equipment, land, buildings that have occurred over the past 20 plus years.
Thank you for that clarification. And regarding page 31, which is page 10 of your papers, around passenger movements, you talk about expecting a return to pre-COVID levels of passenger numbers, but of course the economic environment we're in now is different to where we were pre-COVID, in the sense that we're officially in a recession, costs of living has increased, all of those things. So I just want to understand what factors you've taken into account for how the economic environment we're in now is considerably different to where we were pre-COVID, and assuming that we'll get back to those passenger numbers.
We're really basing that on discussions with airlines on where we think we'll get to. Of course, it is just a forecast, but we know we're on a trajectory to recover to pre-COVID levels. It may be a year later, but we're fairly confident that that level of passenger volumes will be achieved again.
Thank you. And finally, perhaps a question to our officers or perhaps the CE. What options does Council have available for oversight of the terminal development program aside from the statement of intent process? Have we got any options, or is this pretty much it?
Thank you, through the chair. There'll probably be perhaps a conversation that I could have with David and his team just about what that might look like. We haven't discussed that at this particular stage, but perhaps we could just consider that. I'll perhaps come back to you on that.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in regards to the Airport Drive, has there been, this is probably an internal question, any advancements on exploring bringing the ownership of that asset into the city? Probably through internal for our own officers.
Through you, Mr. Chair. There was a meeting, was it late last week actually, between the Chief Infrastructure Officer, myself, the Chief Financial Officer, the CE, and David and the team from the airport company, and that, there was a process we agreed to in terms of next steps to start to look at that. The first thing was getting a good handle on the condition of the road.
Okay.
Relative to our standards.
Okay, thanks for that update. As a second point, just exploring your inability to unlock the diversification strategy that you've committed to because of your lack of capital being absorbed in the project. And what's proposed is the first $12 million development is you're looking to do a joint venture. Can I just explore the possibility of how limiting that would be to only get a proportional return on that diversification strategy going down that track, and then even further comment around how limiting it is for you to have ongoing investment for growth?
It very much is limiting. It would essentially mean we would generate approximately 50% of the income that you would otherwise generate. So let's assume it becomes a $6 million investment by us with the associated returns. So it basically halves our ability to achieve income diversification, or doubles the time required.
Can I just explore, if there wasn't the financial restraint to invest, what sort of opportunity there would be over the next 3 to 5 years for investment in Ruapehu Aero Park, or whatever the name is, to unlock diversification of income? Like, what is the opportunity that exists in that space that we're not pursuing?
It's a good question. There are opportunities, I guess, though, because we understand our constraints, we are limiting what we are chasing. We are very close to delivering leases for the proposed $12 million facility. If we had confidence in funding to consider further investments, we would be actively out there chasing business. There is opportunities. The amount of demand for the warehouses that we're looking at has been surprising. There are opportunities there. It's just that we're, I guess, limiting our own ambitions because of the realism of what we have available to spend. Yeah, we are, and as the board members mentioned, we are being approached. You know, people are coming forward. They're seeing what we're looking at doing with the warehouses and looking for opportunities to come to the airport and to invest in us.
Through you, Chair, just, and perhaps to you, Steve, around having a share issue where we increase the total number of shares and go for other shareholding investment to actually increase the capacity to for the ongoing strength of the airport board and the operation. What thoughts have you got if we would expand, say, another $20 million opportunity to go in at that shareholding level to bring new perspective to the board?
We haven't studied that in any great detail at this stage as to what the steps would be involved, but we've had some preliminary talks about what might be involved, and it requires a bit further work for us to understand really what we would need to do and what would be the logical steps. I guess from my own historical perspective in the business, bringing in a new shareholder in whatever form is something you don't do really lightly. We struggled with our previous minority shareholder because we were unable to reach a commonality of goals for the investment. We didn't have a shared perspective that lasted the distance, and so bringing in any new partner in whatever form requires a common goal and really clear objectives about what's trying to be achieved.
And can I just pursue that a little bit further? That historical case we kind of inherited somewhat. If we were to advance exploring a share issue, we could actually outline those objectives that we were wanting to share with the other investor. Would that be true?
Certainly, yes, we would be really clear about any proposal would need to have a well thought through and documented approach to what was planned.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pretty well much along the same lines as Councillor Jennison, probably to officers and maybe to the Chief Executive. What do elected members need to do if we wanted to explore other investment opportunities into the airport, i.e. that be shareholding, extra shares? What do we need to give you a direction and an instruction on that, or are we just, because I wasn't clear on the answer given there.
Through the chair, yes, you would. In my view, I think that what we're talking about today is the statement of intent for the airport business and how it is not going to operate across the course of the next 3 years. If you're wanting to do something else or ask officers to do something else, I'd recommend a recommendation come forward for that.
Okay, thank you. Two more questions, and some have just already been answered. Probably back to the airport company. And look, the terminal development plan, obviously, the last meeting, and David, you weren't here, but there was a bit of debate around the cost and the value of doing that. Can we get some understanding what your competitors, our competitors as regions, because it is competitive, Nelson, Hawke's Bay, New Plymouth, what have been their terminal costs? Are they less? Are they more? Are they around the same? Just to give some context.
Nelson and New Plymouth, if we adjusted for the time value of money, are more expensive than what we're proposing. Hawke's Bay, from memory, is about the same. So we're probably middle of the pack in terms of the cost, bearing in mind that some of them were done 5-6 years ago.
Okay. And look, this is all about risks as well. What are the risks of us doing nothing? Could we survive or not?
From a commercial perspective, I don't think we can because of our seismic issues.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Barrett, were you in the queue?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go for it.
Thank you. Thanks. Just a couple of questions from me. The first one's just around the new dividend policy, and just interested in the future if there were instances where there was a misalignment between the policy outcomes and the owner's expectations. What's the company's understanding of what would take precedence?
Look, I guess that could happen. At the moment, the policy, you know, we've compared against other airports and best practice, and I think, you know, we're trying to put a framework around that. I guess the best way in those circumstances is to sit down and talk these things through. I think whether there's a precedent, I think that, you know, as directors, we need to make sure the company is protected in the first instance. So.
Yeah, understood the drivers in terms of developing that policy, but, you know, just trying to understand your understanding of ultimately what would take precedence.
I understand it's very important to the council, so, you know, we take that into account. It would be of last resort, I would expect to not have a dividend. Is that the sort of...
Would be solvency.
Yeah, yes, that's right, yeah.
The directors are required to undertake some solvency tests and things that would be important that they have to consider before declaring a dividend in any year, and so those sorts of mechanisms would be part of any discussion, I think, back with the council about where they find themselves.
Thank you both for those answers. Secondary questions, Mr. Chair, that I wanted to explore was just around the kind of passenger number forecasts. David, part of your response to Councillor Naylor around the drivers around the new terminal were around passenger numbers being that main driver. So what's the kind of annual passenger number capacity of that new terminal design?
It's based on a busy hour projection of 380 passengers. So rather than a total passenger volume, it's how many you can accommodate within a busy hour, and that's at 380 passengers.
Okay, so what is the long-term expectation from the airport then in terms of your annual passenger numbers? I mean, you've laid out the 3 years, and then there's something about 3% beyond that, is that?
Sure, so we get up to something like 1 million passengers, I think, in 800,000 by 2034, and then into the 40s, I think we hit 1 million passengers. But the driver, the way terminal sizes are estimated are based on how many you would expect in the terminal at a given time, and so 380 gives us significant leeway.
Thanks. Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose the potentially kind of awkward question then is when we get up to those kind of much larger numbers of passengers, kind of what's the airport company's understanding of the relationship between passenger numbers and emissions growth on the air side of things?
Well, at this stage, we really very much have the one operator, Air New Zealand, and we'll need to be discussing with them what types of aircraft they operate, but we have no visibility on aircraft types at this stage.
So would it be reasonable to assume that there is a positive relationship between the growth of passenger numbers and the growth of emissions on the air side?
I don't necessarily agree that could be the case. I think there's obviously technological changes that will happen. We have a master plan that looks at passenger growth out to 2050. We may, of course, have another decade where emissions could grow, but beyond that, I'm not. I couldn't be able to answer whether there's a positive relationship or not.
So you'd say that at least over the next 10 years, that's what we'd be facing, though?
Look, I'm just echoing what's in the public domain. We've all read Air New Zealand's plans around fleet replacement. I think it's realistic that within 10 years they will have low emission aircraft flying, but just what type, what size, I couldn't honestly tell you.
Great, thank you for those answers, appreciated. Mr. Chair.
Councillor Zabella.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to pick up from where the Chair was questioning about passenger numbers, and I really appreciate the work on 10-year projections. And Jonathan, you said that was one scenario. Is that a best case scenario?
It's not the low growth, it's not a high growth scenario, it is the expected growth scenario. It's middle of the road. Thank you. And so, I'm just curious as to how far you've looked into a low growth scenario, just as a sort of risk assessment, whether these numbers, projections pan out as you expect, or what's the planning for if that doesn't eventuate?
The numbers are based on a long-run average growth that we've seen over a period of about 20 years. So during that period, we've seen very high growth, but equally, as you'd appreciate, the last few years we've seen negative growth. It's an average. We believe it's very conservative at the level we've set it at.
Thank you. And when did you revise your dividend policy? When did that occur?
The policy as it stands in the SOI was introduced in the draft version back in February this year.
Right, and so I just wanted to understand a little bit more. You were talking about a framework that's wrapping a framework around your dividend decision for the board, but from my understanding, you're thinking that the framework might lead you to a place where you're needing to sit down with the shareholder and manage expectations a bit as the outcome of the framework. Was I right in understanding that?
That could be an outcome. The question was around if you had a problem meeting that, and I guess you go through the process of making sure that the needs of the business are met first and solvency is met and those sorts of things. So you would have plenty of advance notice of something like that occurring to have those sort of discussions, but it's more that it's protecting the company in the first instance and looking at its needs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Bicolard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of my questions has already been answered around the airport drive, so I'll just follow up with probably another question just to fill my understanding in this. David, what's the cost of maintaining that arterial route?
Okay, over the over the SOI period, we have a budget of around 1 million for upgrades. So what we've done is identified the most at-risk areas of Airport Drive, and so they will be, the plan is to mill those out and replace them over the 3-year SOI period, and that budget that we've set for that work is 1 million over 3 years.
Cool. And probably to officers, and I'll probably go to the Chief Planning Officer. What's the process? And I know that the conversation is still ongoing, but what's the process of, let's say, if we were to bring it to council ownership? What's the process surrounding that, and how long will it take? Weeks, years? What are we saying?
It would need to be vested with the council as a road, just like a developer would do that as part of a subdivision development. So I think there's some further investigations and discussions that need to happen, but I think it's the sort of thing that should be able to be completed within the next financial year, subject to those investigations and discussions.
Cool. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That's expended our list of questions. Thank you for presenting. I will now look to, in fact, no, I won't look to move the substantive. I might offer the Mayor the opportunity to move the substantive and his motion all in one. Right, and seconded by Councillor Arnott. Do you wish to speak to that?
Definitely. I'll just wait till we get it up. So, councillors, there's two there, and I've added a second, which is around investment as well. And it's clear that the company is on a very, very tight budget to complete its master plan. And there is some question marks, and there has been some good questions around what they need. So we should really give them and our residents the best opportunity to obtain extra investment, and that we need to instruct our officers to do that. And that's around perhaps a number of different options, and I'm not going to go to one over the other, but it does include either creating extra shares or selling down a portion of the company. This has happened in other airports around New Zealand. It's happened internationally, obviously, and I don't want to hark back 20 years ago to our inherited shareholder, because that is not a great model, and it's something we inherited, and actually it's a red herring too. And I'm disappointed that it keeps getting brought up. I look at other examples, Queenstown Lakes District with the Queenstown Airport, which were a smaller airport 20 years ago to Palmerston North. But now with a shareholding to Auckland International has enabled that airport to go in leaps and bounds. We're in charge of what that could look like, so we don't have to be fearful that it falls into the wrong hands, because we'd be selecting where it goes. So you'd look for a like-minded partner, obviously somebody that's interested in this part of the world, in this city, in this region, and have the right value set and tikanga that we hold. So I think we've got to be mindful of what that could look like, and that's why then we need to come and have a look at some options. So we need to put that on the table, because it was clear from the CE's response that they're not going to go and do that without some sort of instruction. Secondly, it's around the statement of intent, and I don't want to relitigate what we went through a couple of weeks ago. So really this is around a strategic investment. I stress strategic investment. Do we do this or not? And I think, and I believe, the answer is absolutely yes. At times you need to front load investment, and we heard through questions asked, would the company be at risk? Would our shareholding be at risk? Would our region be at risk if we didn't do this? Absolutely was the answer, yes. So at times you need to understand that as well, and I understand people have different levels of risk as well. And, you know, one thing in business, the 30 years of business taught me that sometimes you do have to front load investment. And I think I've said before that BNZ ad, that old BNZ ad, where there's good money and there's bad money. Good money's around prudent investment with payback down the line. And this is where we're going with this. The terminal we're in a perfect storm. Costs have increased. If we don't do it, do we have an airport? Probably the answer is that we will dwindle away. So we do need to do something, and it's not around pure jets. The CAA screening and having been part of Airport New Zealand's AGMs and strategic meetings, we know that is possibly coming. It's just a matter of when. So the risks, I believe, are much, much higher if we do nothing. I gather that it's a big cost, and there is some nervousness around that. I also want to, I have some questions of the airport company and the communicating of the plan, and I will be right up front with that to us as shareholders and even to officers. So I would signal to or implore to the airport company that they include the CE or one of our senior team in your terminal development committee, so there's a real connection and conduit to us, because although we are hands-off and have the airport company running the airport, we still as shareholders have a responsibility and need to understand what it looks like. So I would like better communication and what that would look like. Not micromanaging by any means, but just an understanding what that looks like. So please, councillors, you have to support this. If we don't, it's a very, very slippery slope and possibly a race to the bottom. So I encourage you to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support the recommendations and really give some reflections on the statement of intent, but also the importance of pursuing, or at least exploring, issuing more shares to expand the shareholding. The statement of intent, I think, has a lot of weaknesses. It's running us into what is a checkmate situation when we get resource all our available funds, and then just sit there waiting for the game to finish, and no one wins. And even that gets confusing when we pursued in the April meeting around having some dividend repayment, although it's more notional, having that 9-7 vote in the April meeting on that strategy of recognising a dividend, when actually there's some ongoing investment that's needed. And I think what the Mayor highlighted is around this is critical upfront investment, and we want to make sure we get that done right. So for some of those reasons that we're exhausting our financial resource, and yet we've got so much unpacked potential that's just sitting in checkmate situation, I think they're fundamentally fundamental weaknesses of the statement of intent. Therefore, I see there's only one opportunity that's really going to resolve this, and that's not just to give benefit to the Airport Board, it's also to give benefit for our city and our region to unlock the diversification strategy, which is the alternate scenario. We've got an asset as of June 22 saying about 83 odd million dollars. If we could pursue another sizable sum to invest, and the proposition's pretty cool, really, where the company's secured its investment for its building infrastructure. We have strategic land holding, which is pretty significant. We have interest to go into investment for long-term leases, and we already know there's a $12 million proposal and interest enough for that, and indications are there's more within the next period of time, and certainly in the next 10 years of time, to grow our distribution and logistics hub. And so I think it's just fundamental that we actually get an exploration on this. I too find it disappointing, harking back to the difficult outcome that we had with the other minor shareholder in the early 2000s. We inherited that arrangement, and sure, that wasn't favourable, and we were mixed-yoked as far as the outcomes that we're pursuing. But we can be quite clear on what we're heading towards, and as far as a strategic opportunity for someone to invest in growth in the aeronautical opportunities from a low base after COVID to grow the flight numbers and all that other opportunity, but the non-aeronautical opportunities around unlocking land, diversifying the income is pretty immense. And so as far as appeal to a shareholding audience, I think the proposition's pretty compelling and pretty real. And I think what that would do, well, I believe what it would do, is give the board a lot more strength in being able to have optionality rather than just being in that checkmate position, which I think is really weak. So for some of those reasons, I just can't underestimate how important. The concern I have, as soon as the board go into a joint venture with this $12 million project, they go in with a proportional investment, they're only going to get a proportional return. And that's just a weak way forward. They should be pursuing avenues and having the opportunity to pursue that avenue, having 100% of that strategy captured. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really just got a question really for officers really, and that is just around what are the implications in terms of uncertainty created by the second motion, and I guess that's really around timeline, how that might affect the airport's intent to get on with the job in terms of investment for those matters that have indicated for investment. Thank you.
Through the chair, the second motion is really for our team here to be involved with that. We would certainly involve the airport in the conversations before anything would potentially be presented back, so they had some oversight of what it is that's maybe been reported back or proposed as well. But it's we've always got plenty to do, so this is just another recommendation that we would put in the mix of everything else that we need to get on underway with. There isn't a time frame on that, but I'm suggesting that there is no doubt in the mover's position would be that we wouldn't want that to be drifting on for long periods of time.
Yeah, so would the, thank you, Wade. Just, so that would actually include a risk-benefit analysis across the proposal?
Yeah, well, if we're into sort of preparing options and looking at business cases, there does need to be some risk assessment as part of that process.
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll speak briefly to the second recommendation first. While it's quite fresh to hand in terms of only seeing any indication around it today, my general view as an elected member is that it's helpful to look at options, helpful to understand implications, risks, as Councillor Hancock's identified, but also opportunities as Councillor Dennison and the Mayor have identified. So I would say, while my kind of overall outlook about dilution of council shareholding is quite cautious, I would be prepared to look at some options analysis so that we can really understand and so the community as well would have some visibility around that. So I would be prepared to support that, which probably brings me to the point of asking that we would take these two motions separately ultimately. My principal comments around the statement of intent and would offer a bit of an alternate perspective to some of those that have been shared already and ask you to hear me out in terms of reconsidering support around this. I would say first up, I do see a number of positives about the statement of intent. Obviously, continued air service provision. Positive that we're looking at diversifying, especially where we're potentially diversifying the business into lower emissions activity. Really want to congratulate the airport in terms of the comprehensive approach they've taken on emissions on their side, and as well in terms of being responsive to our recent instruction around dividend. So there's a lot of positives in there. But while I am supportive of continued air service provision, I am increasingly uncomfortable with the notion of continued growth in passenger numbers over the long term, building a larger terminal to accommodate that as we are in a climate crisis. It's just until we have ways to get out of the gnarly problems around emissions associated with air transport, I can't be justifying signing off on things that at least in the short and medium term and potentially in the long term will continue to exacerbate emissions. Now, maybe Air New Zealand's got something up their sleeve we're going to see in 10 years' time, as was indicated in response to questions. I'll be in a position of believing that when I see it, and I haven't seen evidence yet that suggests that within the time frame that we need to address our emissions, that the airline industry is in a position to support that transition. So, I acknowledge that there's a lot of players around the passenger number trends. A lot of that comes through airline promotions. A lot of that comes through individual choice. But we as airport owners do have a part to play in that too. And I think, the value of the public ownership, and as the Mayor's pointed out, is around strategic decisions. And I'd say that the response to the climate crisis is about as strategic as it gets in this century. I'm certainly not singling out the airport. We're working across the whole community in terms of how we manage down emissions over time. And so this is simply saying let's be consistent and ensure that everyone's contributing to that. Now, before my words get potentially twisted in any way, I want to be really clear. I'm not saying no to air travel. What I'm saying is less air travel now because we need to be drawing down our emissions. And regrettably, what I see in the draft statement of intent signals emissions growth. It signals millions of dollars going into a bigger terminal, and it's for those reasons around emissions growth that I'm unable to support this. So I would ask again for separation. We'll be voting against recommendation 1.
Thank you, Councillor. I might take this opportunity to add my own comments to the debate here. So there's two things we're discussing. First is a statement of intent, and I'll make my comments on those, and then secondly on the additional recommendation. A few general comments on the statement of intent, particularly about the terminal development program. I have significant discomfort in the level of investment that's going to be required and the lack of oversight we've had. So I'd just like to back up what the Mayor said at the start of this debate of my desire, and I would be interested in my colleagues' opinions, of the desire of Council having some form of oversight and accountability of that particular project, whether it's in the form of the Chief Executive or one of our senior officers. I've asked the Chief Executive if he needs direction from us to do that, and the advice I've had is no. They would undertake that without advice from the Chamber, but I want to be very clear here in this forum that that is what I would like to see happen. For the simple fact that this is a significant investment that is going to push the airport to its limits, and if we have traditionally taken a more or less hands-off approach, let the airport and manage itself, this is a different scenario. We keep hearing that this is a one-in-a-generation headwinds and a significant investment that's never been seen before for this airport. And so given that, I feel a slight change of approach and more accountability is required to give this chamber the confidence that the project will be delivered successfully. In terms of the joint venture that they're looking at for the Aero Business Park, I take a slightly different opinion to Councillor Dennison. 100% of $0 is still $0. 50% of something is something. And so if we're in a position of either we can't do anything, and so we would have 100% of the benefits of $0 being generated, or we would have a 50% benefit of whatever ends up being generated, then I'm quite open to that. We, as a council ourselves, are always looking to partners to work with to help reduce the cost of investments needed. One of the great assets of the airport is the land it has. One of the great challenges of the airport is the lack of ability it has to leverage debt over the next 10 years for any projects other than the terminal development. And so for the position they're in, if I were in their shoes, I would be looking at, we put up the land, you put up the capital and build, and we share the profits 50-50, which is, from the comments we heard, round about what they're looking at doing. So I understand that it would be nicer to get 100%, but if our option is we get 50% in a joint partnership program of specific investment, or we reduce our shares as a council to allow that investment to happen, I would much rather take the opportunity that we partner with other organisations to do that work that is needed. We have huge unlockable potential there in that Aero Park. You don't have to look far down to Christchurch, whose Aero Park over the last 5 to 10 years has taken off, excuse the pun, despite the fact that their zoning restricts them to strictly aeronautical activities, which our zoning does not. So there is no reason that our Aero Park, with Te Tanganui, with growth in the industrial sector, with businesses moving out of Auckland, there is no reason that we shouldn't be able to be in that same successful position, aside from the fact that the airport doesn't have the capital to leverage to do it. So I say, good work, continue looking for those partnership opportunities, and from my perspective, you've got my full support in that. I want to briefly touch on the dividend. And it was interesting to hear Shelley's view that the dividend wouldn't be asked for unless the airport was in an insolvent position. I don't think that the airport was insolvent 4 weeks ago or 2 months ago when we had the fight to bring the dividend back. So I appreciate that that lens has been taken over. Apologies if I missed it, that it would only be in a position where the airport wasn't able to pay it if it was to do with the airport's financials. What concerns me is around Councillor Naylor's questions that the forecasting the airport's been doing is on a 20% dividend over the next 10 years, despite the fact that we quite clearly indicated throughout this process over the last 8 months that we would like to see a return to 40% dividend. We saw when we initially requested dividend, they just didn't put it in. And then when we required a dividend to be put in and said that we would like to see it return to 40% over the next 3 years, that has been ignored. But that's fine. What we will have to do as a council is if we want to see that return, we will have to specifically request that return, and that's a learning for us for next year. In terms of the Mayor's additional motion, I have, and I've expressed this to the Mayor, I do not have much of an appetite for selling down shares in the airport. However, I'm fully supportive of us investigating it and seeing if the opportunity was there, looking at what the risks and benefits would be to this council. I don't like the idea. I take the approach with all assets that it is very easy to sell, it is very hard to get them back, and that the quick cash injection we get from selling isn't always worth the long-term loss. However, given the extraordinary position that we are in with our airport, I am going to support the additional recommendation that we look into it so that we have the information in front of us to be able to make an informed decision as we come to it at the time. As a quick side note, advice from officers is that if we weren't to pass a statement of intent today, that would be acceptable. What we would need to do is give the airport direction on what we would like to see discussed or changed. So for those councillors who are thinking of whether or not they will or won't support the statement of intent, I want to give you some confidence that this is not just a rubber stamping exercise. We do have the ability not to approve the statement of intent if that is what this chamber so chose to do. With that, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. That leads quite nicely into my comments because I won't be endorsing the statement of intent for a number of reasons. I'm really happy to support, well, I'm happy to support the second recommendation, whilst I do have some reservations about selling shares in the airport or additional investment, external investment. I mean, it's certainly I'm very open to exploring that. However, I'm really at a loss to understand why anyone would invest in the airport at the moment when there is such a small return for that investment. When we had a 40% dividend, that represented about a 1% return on the investment or on the asset. With the the proposed change to the dividend being only a 10% next year, that actually represents about 0.25% return, and moving up to 20% turns out to be about 0.5% return. So anyone, if they put their money in the bank, would get about 25 times that at the moment, to my calculations. So, I mean, if we can find someone that's willing to invest in that at such a small return, then that would be great. My main concern in terms of the statement of intent, look, I agree with a lot of the comments that the Mayor did make, but it's not what's proposed here or nothing. There are alternatives. The alternate is not necessarily to do nothing. 40 million investment into the terminal development plan is what is meaning that that the airport can't invest in the other diversification of income. And from that perspective, financially, it's not good for our ratepayers. I think the benefits of that investment are not significant enough for our ratepayers to justify the significant loss of financial benefit from having a very, very small dividend on what is a significant asset. Many of us have often acknowledged that it's primarily a strategic asset, and I acknowledge that again today. However, it is still an asset, and in the current economic environment, it's one that I would hope that our ratepayer was getting a better return on than 10%, you know, what is very small. And that's primarily as a result of the level of investment into the terminal development plan. Councillor Dennison mentioned that it does have a lot of weaknesses, and my tolerance of risk does not go as far as to extend to this. The interest is going from $500,000 to over $3 million within a few years. The debt-to-equity ratio is going up to 61%. Our debt is going up fivefold. It's simply not a prudent plan for a way forward, in my view. I acknowledge we do need, that something does need to be done with the terminal, but I don't think the extent of growth that's being assumed that's necessary. And I think it would make more sense financially to have a better financial plan of how we're funding that before embarking on what I think is extremely risky, to be honest, and that is acknowledged in the commentary in here. So I won't be supporting it. I mean, I did express some of those views when we looked at it as a draft, and it certainly hasn't changed from that draft, so I guess that's consistent.
The Mayor for his right of reply.
Thank you. Geez, do I need it. Right, okay, I'll start with, I'll come back to the substantive, but I'll start with number 2 and the shareholding options, whatever that may look like. And this resolution probably is almost more important than the substantive. And look, we're seeking we would possibly be seeking like-minded partners and their investment. And are we attractive? Because there's been a few, views put out there that we're not attractive, we're not generating anything. Are we attractive? Hell yes, absolutely. But we still need to be cautious, and that's why we're looking for options. And we need something to come back to us rather than just making a flippant decision on the fly. We are very strategic in our location. That's why we're here. This is a crossroads. This is a nexus. I mean, 1930, this council attracted Massey University, and they had a plan around air, road, and rail travel. We're going back to the future with all of this, but we need some help. Otherwise, we wouldn't be putting up our second resolution there. We need it around distribution and freight. The airport company has land holdings, which Councillor Dennison has identified as being attractive and strategic. Our flight training, we have the top flight training school in the country, one of the top in Australasia. And then lastly, which has been targeted a little bit, is the passengers, but actually it's the diversification of all of those things. And the airport company's contribution to Te Utanganui, the Central New Zealand Distribution Hub. Just this morning at 7:30, we had the governance group meeting, and we had external people coming in here absolutely excited and investing, or wanting to invest. And that is all on the back of a plan, a master plan, and the airport is a critical part to that. So I'll come back to the substantive, the SOI, and yes, I admit it is on the higher risk of normal, pretty basic statement of intents, which are very, very low risk. And I realise that some of you have either zero appetite for any risk, or you do have some appetite to continue. Councillors, this is a strategic asset, and I've got to come back to that, because mixing it up with bank deposits, I think, is not the way to debate this. Otherwise, we just stick the money in the bank. It's not that. It's a gateway to this region. So if we say no to this business is around surety. You will send such a negative signal to the market, including airlines, our tenants, freight forwarders, and actually one of the largest sectors that the city has underpinning nearly 8,000 jobs around logistics and distribution. So you need to support this. We can do that on the proviso that the CE or one of the senior managers are in with the terminal development group, and we have some greater oversight on what is happening. Saying no to this, seriously, is such a major negative. It's been painted as it's a little thing. It isn't. It is a major, major negative. So please, councillors, with some oversight from the CE, we do need to approve this SOI. So I do ask you to support it, please.
Right, we'll take those two separately. So I'd like to invite you to vote on the first item there. Do I need to read it out? All right. That the committee agree the statement of intent for Palmerston North Airport Limited for 2023/24 to 25/26. I'll ask you to vote. Can everyone check they've voted, please? That has passed, 11 votes for, 2 votes against. Thank you, Councillor, for keeping us in suspense. We'll now move to the Mayor's additional motion, that the council instruct the Chief Executive to prepare options/business case for extra investment or shareholding to Palmerston North Airport Limited and present back to council. I'll invite you all to vote. And that has passed. 13 votes in favour, none against. Thank you to our friends from the airport for coming in and presenting to us today. We greatly appreciate it. And we will now move on to our next item, which is the Central Economic Development Agency final statement of intent. So I'll invite Bobby, Jerry and one of our officers, and David.
Morena koutou. So the draft statement of intent was presented to April at the April committee. At the time, there was a series of sort of more general questions to Bobby and Jerry. The report in April had a series of sort of minor edits or recommendations to the statement of intent. When the committee considered the draft, there were no specific changes over and above those minor edits that were sought by the committee. MDC also had a few minor edits, so those have been made and are detailed in the committee report for today. I can advise that MDC, or CEDA, Bobby, Jerry and the team attended MDC last week, and MDC approved the final statement of intent, so it's here present today for your final approval. Myself and Jerry and Bobby are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and apologies for late arrival this morning. Thank you all for coming back again today to speak to your statement of intent. My question probably for you, David, actually, just following up on the comments under 3.2 about next steps and recognising that we're coming into the end of the funding period. There's a suggestion made there that there's an option to provide CEDA with a funding agreement extension or a written funding commitment, and I wanted to understand how we would achieve that, if that's what Council wanted to do.
It could, in the past, that has been a letter from the Chief Executive. I guess what we would need to do is, and this hasn't happened yet, and I guess we need to get a little bit of feedback about how it went with MDC last week, but obviously have a conversation with our shareholding partners, get a sense of where they're at in the lead up to the next LTP. If it was a letter from the Chief Executive, obviously it would be qualified by the fact that it's subject to the LTP, and as I've said, that funding would be no less than the current funding, again, subject to the LTP. But what that does provide is just a level of certainty to Bobby, Jerry and the team. They have staff to employ, offices to rent, those sorts of things. It provides them with a level of certainty. So the answer to your question is, I think, if in the past it's been a letter from the CE, so unless there was concern otherwise, that's what we'd look at doing.
And in order to trigger that letter from the CE, is that required to come through the chamber, or is that within delegation?
I think provided that letter qualified the fact that any funding commitment was subject to the LTP, then that was something that we could do at the officer level.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr Chair.
If I can just add something to that, just around I think David asked for clarification about how it went at the Manawatu District last week. They were discussing with us the potential of a 3-year statement of intent, which was really, really positive. Just from an operational sense, part of our budget that's been offered through this statement of intent is predicated on potentially looking at a new office. For us to do that, we need to be in a position to negotiate that starting around Christmas time. So, yeah, just to let you know. Yep.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate that.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Bobby, for the work that's gone into getting us here. A couple questions. I'll refer to page numbers in our agenda overall. The first one's around our performance measures area. On page 78, we kind of, I'll give you a second to get to page 78. just in there, Jerry, there's kind of reference to ramping up the number of engagements with businesses. And I guess potentially those could be, more engagements with the same businesses, or potentially that could be diversification. And just wanted to kind of understand what you see sitting behind those numbers, especially vis-a-vis diversification.
Good question. So 320 of those engagements sit inside the regional business partnership activity. The rest of them are CE business manager engagements with businesses, and that could be one-to-one or one-to-many. So we're looking at, for instance, we've had discussions recently with a freight forwarding company or a logistics company that wants to do, I guess, bringing together small consignments from small to medium enterprises who aren't big enough to fill a container. So one of the things we want to do is have a one-to-many with companies around the region who want to do exporting to right across the world, actually, but haven't known how to start those conversations. So there's going to be a combination of different things in there. Of course, the big one for us at the moment around Te Utanganui is engagements around trying to bring new investment into the city as well.
Great, thank you. Next question's a bit further along around the monitoring indicators, which is page 82, it looks like. The reputational monitoring, which is the final line at the bottom there, the indication is that it's only happens every 3 years. I guess does CETA have a view around whether we should be waiting and just only having check-ins every 3 years on reputation, or whether there might be a higher tempo justified?
Yeah, I guess this refers to, in a sense, we do a deep dive reputational survey, and that's an expensive survey, so we've budgeted that for this year, and I think that's just happening. So we're still looking at ways in which we can do that engagement through pulse surveys and just interaction with companies around getting their, I guess, their feelings around how business is going at a point in time. We're trying to do per year about 50 engagements through myself and the business management lead, just to get that sentiment so that we can actually carry that through. So this just sort of, I guess, is a measure of the 3-year cycle of the bigger investigation, but we certainly do that pulse check all the way through.
Thanks. I guess to pursue that a bit then, thinking about the next time we have the opportunity to develop one of these, would I be correct in hearing from you then that there might be some other data sources that we might be able to use to give us a more agile indicator rather than every 3 years?
Yes, that's true. Yep.
Great, thanks. That's helpful to note. Finally, Mr. Chair, it's just page 81, just the page above, where there's reference to the strategic alignment around the city. And in particular, the eco-city space there talks about a couple areas where the CETA's indicating alignment. I guess I'm a bit struggling with those statements to understand the specific alignment around eco-city. They're quite generic, and I just wondered if there's, I guess, any further context you could put around that, or a rationale around why we do have quite generic alignment there.
I guess, in a sense, we're always keen, and in fact, yesterday we spent the last 2 days at the Utapu conference in Christchurch, which is coming to the city next year. All of that conference is around sustainable nutrition, sustainable practices, all those sorts of things, and we're really clear. One of the messages I got from that was loud and clear, was people are driven by two things in terms of sustainability and the eco-city from our perspective anyway. One is that they need that to be able to, in a sense, to open up access to other funding mechanisms in terms of growing their companies, but secondly, because it's the right thing to do for the consumer. So we're really driven by trying to involve ourselves at levels from supporting the two councils that are our shareholders around initiatives that they have to have an eco approach to how they might treat waste, for instance. And just recently we've provided a letter of support for the Manawatu district around their intentions in that space. But we're also very, very keen, again, in that one-to-many environment and working with people like Tony Grace at the city to expose our businesses to how they might, look at the sustainable goals that we're trying to drive in terms of the eco-city and the eco-region.
Thank you. So to pursue that a bit further, then, some really positive commentary there. On reflection, could in future we think about kind of ways of signaling that alignment that is a bit more obvious than perhaps what's in the current statement?
It's actually in there somewhere. If we've got 3 of the sustainable goals actually mentioned inside the statement of intent, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, sorry, Jerry, I'm trying to bring you to, in terms of that specific table, it actually sums alignment. I agree, there's actually some mentions throughout the statement of intent around that could be seen as alignment, but then you come to the actual statement of alignment and it doesn't seem to have flowed through. I guess that's what I'm trying to get to on this.
Oh, yes, the answer to that's yes. No, we can do that, yep.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jerry, Bobby and David. That expends our list of questions. So I'll let you go back to your seats. Look, I'd seek to move that the committee agree the final statement of intent, 23-24, submitted by the Central Economic Development Agency, and I'll look to a seconder in the Mayor. And look, I'll just start the comments off here by saying thank you to Jerry and Bobby in particular, but also to your entire team for the work you do in promoting our region. I had the pleasure of presenting alongside Greg Bignell a few weeks ago at a conference, and the message that CEDA has to sell of the Manawatu is a really positive one, and had a great response from the business people that were in the room, and a real interest that came out of it in the Manawatu and Palmerston North area. Whether it's Te Reo Tanganui, whether it's the Manawatu food strategy, supporting our businesses and selling our region, you do a fantastic job. And I appreciate both of you have come into this role within the last year or two, so that there's some work to be done in shaping the organisation's future the way that you would like to see it go. And so we appreciate that, and we see that coming through in the statement of intent you've put through to here. I particularly like the work you're doing in supporting small and medium businesses. I've heard a small criticism in the past that CEDA has had quite a focus on large enterprise, so it's good to see the work you're doing, particularly around the container initiative, making that international market more accessible for our small and medium enterprises that are getting up and started in the Manawatu here. With that, I'll open the floor. The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to thank CEDA, Jerry and Bobby as Chair. Look, councillors, our involvement in economic development is another strategic investment, and I don't believe it's a cost. I know it sometimes can be seen that way, and that's because it's a long game. It takes sometimes years to either attract an organisation, to shape a sector, and to get the light that the fire's lit underneath to make it really project. I think it was Councillor Bowen spoke about the statement of intent and longevity of that. And like MDC, I think we should be looking at something that's a bit longer than just a year to year. We can certainly shape stuff within it, but we should be really making a commitment to a longer term investment in CEDA. And there's many reasons why. It gives surety to partners, it gives surety to the organisation. And when you're on a somewhat tight rope around whether the organisation will even exist past 3 years, in this sort of business, that's too short a time frame. And it's because of the strategic projects that they're undertaking. Te Reo Tanganui, and I just want to thank councillors in that last vote. That was showing some strategic intent. That is such a big project for the shaping of our city and our wider region. The regional food strategy and becoming one of the world's top agri-food hubs. And I think we're some way towards that, but it's joining the dots. There's the inward investment, there's the retention of business. We can't forget, we've got to look after what we've got here first too. So looking after those businesses that are here in the wider city in Manawatu and supporting them. And then adding in the visitor tourism and the new destinational marketing plan. That has been a significant amount of work which doesn't get a lot of profile, but absolutely it's been a game changer since I've been around this table. And absolutely identifying what we're good at in that ecotourism, that visitor marketing space. A couple of wins for CEDA, because sometimes you do need to point to what they've done, because I think it's Jerry that says they're the watermark, not the logo, using his language. But there's been some new investments to the city. Yesterday, you would have seen the announcement of ADA, the New Zealand Defence Force, Australian Defence Force Logistics and Distribution Centre opening up. Now, the building's been under construction for some time, but that business will add not only jobs, but another arrow or leg to our distribution hub. E Tipu Boomer, the New Zealand Agri Summit. I went down yesterday to Christchurch and saw the handover or the co-hosting biannually that the city will do with Christchurch City. That's a major think tank around what the future of food looks like. I think it's absolutely our space, and there's a lot of our people there. So having 700 plus delegates come to our city for the best part of a week, I think is a fantastic event, and it's been attracted by those people. So again, well done. We're also finally just growing some really closer links with our partners, and especially our other shareholder, MDC. We're quite aligned on a lot of this work, and I think that's been really helpful. As we go through quite a change in local government and the future of local government, I think it's really important that we have well-meaning, great relationships and partnerships with our neighbours. And economic development is one of the ones that we definitely do have. So thanks for the work you're doing, CEDA, and again, very supportive of the kaupapa. Thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also wanted to congratulate you on the excellent work you do and basically echo the Mayor there that fantastic news about the clothing supplier. So often we're used to hearing negative news about businesses leaving, but it's great to hear somebody coming, and let's keep that ball rolling. And as the last item that we saw, you know, it is important and there's huge opportunities there, so thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to CEDA for the work that you do and the positive spirit you do it in, I suppose, and bringing that into the chamber today. My questions were about my concerns about this year by year rolling programme that we take to SOIs, well, in general, but in your case specifically, I have some questions about how well that serves the purpose that you're trying to achieve. I'm encouraged by the officer's comment that the chief executive can, under delegation, step into this space to provide as much certainty as we're able within our processes that will enable you to roll forward into the next period of time. So I was wondering whether we need to do something formal in the chamber for that, and I understand from the comments that we don't, but I do just want to say thank you for the work that you've done, and we look forward to continue to support you to do that excellent work.
The Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, o te rā tātou. Seems that it's a familiar theme going around here. I too want to thank Jerry and Bobby and the CEDA team. It's very impressive in terms of reading the statement of intent. It's clear to see what the purpose is, the objectives, and knowing also that you're achieving those in a great way. And I think it's progressive. Also, I think that it's clear to see you're striving for transformative outcomes, transformative outcomes. The mindset that comes, that's, I suppose, illuminated through all of this is critically important for progress, and we can see that you're striving for that. So thank you, and I look forward to new heights for all of us. Kia ora.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the whole CEDA team, the board, as well as Jerry and the staff. As others have said, certainly endorse the comments recently around, some better continuity and certainty, and I think anything that can be done in that space, certainly welcome. A main comment beyond that of appreciation is just indicating that, in my view, there is a lot of good work being done in that sustainability space that maps well, and would like to see that more clearly articulated and more obvious in terms of both intent and the reflection of progress when we see reporting. There's much to celebrate in that space and also much to do in that space, and it'd be good to see it more visible here. Thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you again, Bobby and Jerry. Bobby, loved your foreword as well in there some way. Jerry, and all the hard work you do. Just for the benefit of my councillor colleagues, if I may just acknowledge Jerry and the work that he presented to the international markets on our recent delegation abroad. We got to see, well, I got to see Palmerston North City, Manawatu, Rangitane, held up in lights, flashing lights in both Missoula, Montana, Helena, the capital of Montana, in the Governor's office, and then again over in Amsterdam in the New Zealand Ambassador's New Zealand Embassy office as well. In that particular space, it was Jerry that formulated with the Mayor about bringing a delegation from the Netherlands to the Etipu conference that the Mayor spoke about. So thank you very much again. Pleasure. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and with that we'll look to vote. I've already read this out, so I won't read it out again. I'll look for everyone to vote. Right, that has passed. 13 votes in favour, none against. Thank you, and Jerry and Bobby, for coming into the chamber today. I think we'll take a short 15-minute break for morning tea before we get into the rest of our business, so we'll be returning to the chamber at 11:15. Do it if we can. Right, so, just let everybody take their seats. We'll move on to item number 9, which is that, twofold, that the committee lift the report titled the Palmerston North Strategic Networks 2023 from the table, and that the committee recommend that the council endorse the Palmerston North Strategic Networks 2023, attachments 1 and 2, to inform future council decision-making on transport matters, including the 2024-23 long-term plan and supporting documents. I'll invite our Senior Transport Manager, James McGill, to present, and I believe David Murphy will be presenting alongside him.
Okay, cool, thanks. With this paper, I just want to cover off, I guess, a bit of the background that brings us here today. So the officers previously reported this paper, the strategic networks, back in February. The decision was to make light on the table so that officers could run a couple of workshops with elected members to take them through the reasoning behind strategic networks. So we ran 2 workshops, and they covered off the connections between strategic networks and the Palmerston North Integrated Transport Initiative, and the connections to strategic planning for our transport network. In terms of strategic networks, this is a key document to basically publicising what is normally internal documents that's only seen by officers. So it's about making these public and clear and transparent to the community what we are trying to do in terms of strategic transport, and the key part being the priority routes in attachment 2. And these priority routes are not anything new. They give they were adapted from previous planning decisions around transport networks, and so the documents will just formalise those previous decisions, previous documents being the network operating plan, the PAMI transport, the PTCIP, and essentially that's the purpose of the strategic networks. And essentially the next steps will be to finish writing the foreword for the strategic networks, and then to look to socialise that with community, and then move forward to the next step, which is the Roads and Street Framework. I'll now open up for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, James. Thanks, David. Could I just get a comment in terms of how important this is in terms of attracting inbound investment?
It's hugely important, and one of the reasons and the drivers for this piece of work was to produce a shorter, succinct document in terms of the strategic networks document and the priority routes that's easily absorbable by the community, but also as a culmination of some more technical work to be able to demonstrate to Waka Kotahi that we're on the journey to deliver Pinati in its holistic manner, I guess, and all components of that. So we have recently had, for the first time, some positive response from Waka Kotahi about funding, as an example, I guess, in terms of the journey we're on and some of the shifts we're starting to make. They have recently confirmed co-funding of a central city business case, which will be looking at the bus terminal and the Streets for People project. So with the intent, as they start to fund those business cases, that's the first step towards getting co-investment in the actual infrastructure. So in the past, there has been a reluctance to support that as an example.
Thank you. My second question and final is just page 109, which has the diagram showing the relationships between National Land Transport Plan through to the strategic networks. And just seeing, page, just give you a chance to get there, page 109 should be. Yeah, you've just gone past it, David. Right there. Lucky I sat here to see that. So the question I have is just around, to my read of that diagram, this is kind of the first time that we're kind of blending the urban cycle network with Pinati. Is that kind of what we're trying to convey there with the way the connections are?
Yes, certainly we see the Urban Cycle Network Master Plan as a key implementation key implementation tool of Pinati. So, Pinati expects some changes to the urban network over a period of time across a range of modes, or all modes really, including cycling. So, that's seen as one package.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chair.
The Mayor.
Thanks, James, and welcome. Welcome to Council. Good to see you've come to the other Council. And David, look, in terms of some specific, because having read some of the fuller documents, there was some carte blanche commentary about lowering speed zones permanently on all city roads. Can I get some assurance that that would still come back to, and I hear the commentary about we've got to have a strategic networks document, and I am supportive of that, but just some of the stuff that we perhaps don't see at times, that we sign off on this and it doesn't come back to Council. So are those sorts of decisions going to still come back to Council?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, those kinds of decisions will come back to the Council. So the key topics of contention were around parking and setting of speed limits. So both of those are things that the Council will make a decision on. So the speed management plans and the interim speed management plan is being consulted on, and these will come to Council. And then once we get into the parking framework, that will also come before Council as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How much has Council engaged with emergency services about routes throughout the city that are important to them to be able to get to where they're going to save lives?
Yeah, there hasn't. I mean, this piece of work is a culmination of some strategic transport planning that's been undertaken over a number of years. And certainly emergency services and the like, and those more specific individual components of transport decisions are engaged and consulted on. So I certainly know, as part of the broader development of Pinati, as an example, they were included. So I can recall conversations over the years about, why they continue to travel through the city centre versus use the ring road, for example. So those, and that's influenced the design of intersections and those sorts of things. So. Yeah, it's part of the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, James, for presenting. That comes to the end of our list of questions. Councillors, I'll look to the floor for someone to move this. The Mayor, and a seconder, Councillor Hancock. The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, councillors could understand that why this was lay on the table, because we didn't really have much oversight on it, including myself. And I think that was the prudent way to socialise it better amongst ourselves and get a clear understanding from officers. And actually the officers themselves had a far better understanding of what was being asked of us by the government and their transport agency. We do need a strategic network plan. We can't go with a whole multitude of different plans that sometimes don't talk to each other. And if we want to attract not just government funding, but other funding as well, we've got to have some sort of strategic network plan. As officers have said, it's a combination of pulling together everything from parking through to cycleway plans, through to freight plans, and trying to get a great balance for our city. So please, I ask you to support it. There has been some commentary about what does it mean for certain parts around speed restrictions, perhaps parking within certain sectors of the city. And look, we've got some assurance that some of those individual decisions will still come back to this table. So I think it's worthy of support. It does lead us to a better connection and alignment, not only with the Regional Council but also the Transport Agency. And regardless of what direction a minister might send that agency, it's still worthy of having a plan. So do ask you to support it, and it's a living document because it will keep evolving as we evolve as a city. So please support. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very pleased to support this as well, and I felt, from my perspective, having the additional documentation provided in the earlier meeting was also helpful to see that level of information that officers have to work with in terms of actioning decisions, and as we've heard in response to questions today, bringing some of those key decisions back to us. But this strategic networks document very much responds to the needs of our transport system. It responds to the needs of our city in the future, and it sets out clear priority, and I think that's what we really need to have is clarity when we're working in evolving our transport systems. I like the fact that it more closely knits together Pinati with the Urban Cycle Network Master Plan. I like that it recognizes some of the key demands that or challenges that we're facing around induced demand, how we better manage demand in the system and balance movement in place. It's got clear priority in it around choice, around sustainability, around safety, and around the value of both movement in place. So I'd absolutely see this as the way that we build future-ready cities and would endorse this on the strongest possible terms. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Councillor Barrett's comments wholeheartedly. The only thing I wanted to add to that was to thank the officers for the really useful workshops that took place between the report's appearances on this agenda, and particularly to thank our partners, Waka Kotahi and Horizons Regional Council, for their involvement in those workshops, which I think really helped to ground the importance of this work as a fundamental planning document that enables us to have a functioning system in our strategic network view here. So really important piece of work. I supported it the first time it came here. I'll support it again today, but I think we're all better informed today as a result of those workshops. So thanks to the officers for that.
Councillors, I might add in here, or jump in here. I won't be supporting this, which is probably not going to come as a surprise to many of you. Nothing has changed since this was laid on the table. The plan is the same, the technical documents are the same. The only difference is we can't see them now. That's the only change to the document we have presented to us today as to what we had last time. And to me, simply not showing us the offending technical documents does very little to alleviate my concerns about the details of those technical documents. I appreciate some of you might take the approach of, oh, well, we've been told by officers don't worry about it and we just won't put them in the agenda. I don't take that approach. Those documents still exist. They're still what we are tangentially endorsing by endorsing this plan. It is how officers envisage this plan being implemented, and for that reason, I will not be supporting it. I want to caveat this by saying I recognise we need to have a strategic network plan, and there are some very good parts to this strategic network plan, particularly the work around the freight routes that are being proposed through the maps that we have provided. But just because we need a plan doesn't mean that the one in front of us is the right thing to do for our city. So what are my concerns? Well, those technical documents talk about the rationalisation and removal of street parking on walking and freight priority streets, the routes of which we are going to approve today. And so what does that mean in practice? That means that when we come to programs like Streets for People we have next, where it talks about a 1/3 reduction of street parking in our CBD, 100 parks being taken out, what do? We say, well, that's what we endorsed in the Strategic Network Plan. You can't argue with that. That's a walking priority street. Therefore, we can disregard other modes of transport. We can prioritise what may not be in the best interest of our city, but what we've agreed to in our Strategic Network Overview. All this does is strengthen the case for programs such as that. And I am not a councillor that will vote for something on the proviso that it comes back to council, and then when it comes back, say, it will be told, oh, well, you should have, we approved the plan. because that's what will end up happening with this. We'll have a proposal that comes to us in 3 or 6 or 9 years' time that says we're going to do a flat reduction of our city speed limits to 40 kilometres an hour, and I will stand here and say, well, I don't support that, and what we will get told is, well, you endorsed that in the strategic network plan, we've gone and spent $200,000 developing a plan to do it, it's too late, you should have argued with it at the time. So I'm not in favour of endorsing things that I don't support, even if they will come back to council at a later date. The other part of this plan, I've already spoken about the speed limits. Yeah, frankly, if we vote for this now and we approve it now, when these plans come back to the chambers, the case, it will be too late. There will be no opportunity or very little opportunity to argue against them. And frankly, I do not support proposals that disregard forms of transport. I mean, I am all for walking in our centre city. I am not against walking or cycling in our centre city, but the other thing I'm not against is people driving into our centre city and parking there outside shops. And I'll be talking about this more in the Streets for People plan, but having a program that sets out priority streets over and above other forms of transport will inevitably lead us to a position where we have to make decisions based off the maps that we have put in place, and it will eliminate the arguments against taking those actions. I think there's a very strong argument for the retention of parking in our CBD. Frankly, I think there's a very strong argument with the growth we're seeing for the increasing of parking in our CBD, whether through a parking building or other forms. And so, although there are good bits to this plan, I'm not comfortable with the learning from this being just don't show councillors the technical documents because councillors don't need to see them. I also don't like the fact that we're making decisions based on what Waka Kotahi would like rather than decisions based on what's in the best interests of our community. I have no interest in making policy based on what officers in Waka Kotahi prefer or don't prefer. I have interest in making policy that works for the community that we've been elected to represent. And if that aligns with Waka Kotahi, as some of you I assume will feel that it does, then that's fine, but in my view, it does not. So although there are good bits to this, although I recognise we have to have a strategic network, and although I'm sure this will pass today, I have grave concerns that I'm putting out now so that when it does come back to us, the reduction of parking, the reduction of speed limits, and the removal of people's ability to get around our, or the reduction of people's ability to get around our city in a car, that I've made these concerns very clear now. Because I do not want to sit here and be told, well, we endorse the Strategic Networks plan, so you should have argued it at that stage of the process. Goodness, that's opened the floodgates a bit. Councillor Finlay. Just wait a moment, Councillor.
About CBD?
Could you just start again? You've just come onto the screen.
Oh, sorry. I would agree with the Chair 100%. I would be very concerned to see us lose 100 car parks in the CBD. The businesses would lose an awful lot of business. It would bring unemployment. It would close businesses down. I think it's a stupid idea. We've got more and more people wanting to use our CBD and access it. I'm quite sure a lot of people who come in the CBD now in cars that can't get parks will go home and get a bus and come in town. I doubt it. Not in Palmerston North. I think it's a stupid idea. I think it's concerning that it would even have a plan brought to us with so much hidden information. So I will not support it at this stage. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I am actually going to support this, and contained within the document, there's actually some very good reasons as to why we should all be supporting a plan to, I guess, make sure that we actually have a better flow of traffic throughout our city. There's been a 70% increase in freight vehicle crashes between 2015 and 2019. In 1996, we were the most cycled city in the country. We no longer hold that position. 65% of our roading is more than 40 years old. And 41% of our total carbon emissions is attributed to transport. Our response to improving traffic flows and routes through the city in a safe way, I guess, in my view, has been very sluggish as a council. We have issues with heavy traffic rat running through suburban streets, and that is dangerous and it's costly. Some of these rat runs run past schools and other vulnerable road users. Our roading network requires significant investment and significant priority. And this is really just the first step in actually putting something in place to make sure that we have a plan that is coherent. And the other thing I want to say is that in terms of our cycle network, that has been incomplete for many years, and our response to that in terms of encouraging modal shift is pretty appalling. So please support this as the first step, and it does not set those things which have been mentioned before in concrete. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Chair. I'm supportive of this document. We are putting, as it says, into a single and simple network plan all the multimodal priorities into one document, and I think we are wanting to enhance in the city, if you're looking at it in a city, reducing car parks. That's been a long-term strategy committed to with Streets for People for a number of years prior to now. This is not new. This is also, it says in this presentation that we'll have elected member input with ongoing review and updates being reported back to us. And so council ultimately will be making key decisions along the way as part of committing funding and project plans through our annual budgets. So this is a way, as I understand it, there actually is more investment from Waka Kotahi and third-party investment which is needed, because we know how expensive these capital investments are, and this here is giving us a city that does give priority, does give clear direction for officers, and we still get input along the journey. So I'm not as concerned around what you as the chair have highlighted as personal concerns being reflected on behalf of the community. I personally see this as a bit of a roadmap, a proposition for co-funding, and ultimately a chance for us to do more with our current budgets to get benefit for all residents with their choice of travel. Thank you.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just to echo Councillor Dennison, I think we've heard from the community we want heavy freight movements off our residential streets, which are crumbling under the weight of it, and we've heard that people don't feel safe cycling, but that they would cycle if they felt more safe. And we've heard that footpaths are in awful condition. I think this document lays the foundation for responding to all of those concerns in a short, medium and long-term time frame, and is a roadmap, as Councillor Dennison said. Each design comes to us. It's a case-by-case issue where we have opportunities to work with people that are affected by any of changes that are proposed to by the design. I'm not sure who's coming to us saying, well, it's too late, you've made your bed and now you're lying in it and you can't oppose this particular design because you endorsed in principle a large strategic document which did mention that some car parks may be removed in the course of some sort of design. I'm not sure who's holding us to that post. I think there is still ability for us to respond on a case-by-case basis as and when those pieces of work come before us. But I think the underlying driver for this is that we need to have a plan in place if we want to be attracting co-investment from Waka Kotahi to be able to progress any of this work in the first place, and that's where we need to be starting from. So I'm really happy to support this. Thank you very much.
The Mayor, for your right of reply.
I didn't think I'd need it, but I probably do. Okay. Right. If you go to page 134, this is about the right mode for the right road. And as a growing city, that's absolutely needed. And look, this is about balance, and I stress it's a macro plan. It's not a micro plan. So you've got to have that. It isn't about debating parking or where the cycling's going. Yes, it does include an overall sense of from cycling right through to heavy traffic routes, but those individual decisions, you'll still have input to those. whether it be about parking or speed limits or whatever. Look, I have some sympathy for some of the commentary around that because, you know, at times it does seem like we are forced from government or NZTA. I'm sort of in that space, and there has been poor advice, let's be honest. As mayors, we had to adjust the thinking of the agency to get Te o Turanga, the Manawatu Gorge Highway built. Otherwise, we were just getting a patched up saddle road, and that was going to be our lot. So, yes, there is the opportunity to still push back at times. But please, we've got to have a macro plan. We're jumping down perhaps some, some micro sort of decisions. And look, the agency also does give good advice. It's around improving the right road, cycleway, walking pathway for our city. And I'd just say, I mean, there's been a bit of commentary that, you know, our roads are in poor order, our cycleways have been slow. I'd take a slightly different, having led some of that stuff. We are trying, but we're a growing city, and sometimes it is benchmarked to where we were 10 years ago. Well, we've grown in 10 years. So you've got to have a macro plan for a growing city. You can't have individual stuff going on all over the place that isn't speaking to each other. So please, you've got to have, we've got to do this. You will get input. We've heard that from the officers, and I'll be the first with you around input, around the decision making at the right time. Now's not the right time to have that debate. So please support a macro strategic network plan. It is critical for us and connecting with all our partners as well. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. We'll move to a vote. That has passed. 9 votes in favour, 3 votes against. We'll now move on to our next item on the agenda, item number 10, the Central City Transformation Streets for People project. We have Jeff and Hamish presenting to us on that. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Modena, thank you very much for this opportunity to report back to the committee on the progress of this project. We have in the report the 60% design for the streets within the program. We are continuing to work through the detailed design with the view of finishing that at the end of the month or early in the new financial year. But I'll take the report as being read and happy to answer any other questions.
Councillors, have we got any? Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. I've got a few questions. Just starting with the page 155, it talks about with the rain gardens that there's an increase in operational costs to maintain that. At what point does the increase in operational costs get costed?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we do that as part of the LTP process. So we're not quite at the point of deciding the programs and budgets for the LTP for this project just yet, and I think that would be part of the steering group's mandate to sort of figure out the timing around it all, and at that point, as it goes into the LTP, we'd add an operational at the same time.
Okay, thank you. And just moving to the next page, in 5.2 it talks about the cost review has escalated to 48 million. I'm just trying to understand at what point is any value engineering done, or how much of that cost perhaps is the additional features that have been added in? How much, I'm trying to understand how much consideration of the cost is included in at the design phase.
Through the detailed design phase, at this particular point in time, we have really been focusing on rolling out the design. and the learnings that we had from stage 1 and 2. So you will see that in the design that reflects some of the changes in the inner square, which reduce not inner square, inner side of the square itself. The design reflects learnings from that, which reducing the cost. But what we've found is that it's quite difficult to now value engineer out, because the value engineering, we're really only looking at replacement of product, change of materiality. The 48 million is really trying to implement the streetscape plan in a way that it holds true to that plan with learnings that we've had. So, I think part of the benefit of setting up a steering group would be to actually give us the ability to revision or re-look at the entire scope of what we're trying to do, and not base it solely on the streetscape plan, and look at other opportunities.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave that one there. Just the other question, I've got a couple more if that's okay, Mr. Chair. How much have we spent to date on design?
Approximately, off the top of my head, I think it's around $800,000 on the Becker contract.
Okay, thank you. Just moving to the accessibility parks, and I acknowledge that you've had some engagement with the Disability Reference Group on that. On page 154, I can see that there are proposed to be 22 accessible parks, which is more than what we currently have. One of the issues the group raised was the concern around where there is a wheelchair that needs to be exited from the back of the vehicle, that is exited into the flow of traffic. In terms of the predominant, most of the disability parks are on those angled parks. I'm just wondering, and I recognise that there is, I could see one that's a parallel park, I think on page 165. I'm not sure if there are more. Now, I'm just wondering, what is the thinking to address that concern?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The workshop and the walk around with the Disability Reference Group subcommittee was very, very, very enjoyable, and I learnt an incredible lot from them. What we've done is we've tried to spread the mobility parks across all the streets. Now, we have options in some of the streets where we have perpendicular parking, or parallel parking, sorry, which will allow rear access for those that require that for their parking. If we were to remove all angle parking across the design area, or we were to reduce even further the amount of angle parking, that would enable us to put in more perpendicular parking, which would then allow us to put in more perpendicular mobility parallel. Is it parallel or perpendicular? Parallel parking. What we're doing is we're trying to maximise the space where we've got parking, angle parking. We're trying to maximise trying to minimise the distance people walk to a crossroads. So we're trying to fit those all in, and yes, there's going to be some provision of a particular type of park in a particular area. It's kind of trying to find the balance, and if we were to take out angle parking, for example, on Square West, outside the library, for example, that's got angle parking on the road now, on the left-hand side, and put in perpendicular parallel parking, we would reduce parking down there, but we'd be able to provide that facility. So it's a hard one to sort of try and get the best balance.
So am I correct that there's only one parallel disability park in the whole plat design? The one on page 165?
I think we've also indicated some loading spaces that would be able to be mixed-used.
Thank you, and that was mentioned in the disability reference group, but how would people with a mobility parking card know that they could park in the loading zone? Would they be able to park and stay there?
Sorry, I'm not able to answer that.
Okay, I'll just leave it there, thank you.
The Mayor.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Thanks, Hamish. Thanks, Jeff. Couple of things. On page 154, the changes to your parking there, and where we're talking about the angled, it's great that accessibility has been doubled. That probably should be acknowledged. But also electric, you're doubling that, but actually we've come from a pretty low base, and those with electric vehicles always do complain about the CBD not having enough fast chargers. So has that just been a table that's been put in there with a bit of work yet to go, or is it you've engaged with, fast charging providers?
I think that we've got the opportunity throughout the inner city to put in charging. I don't think, we've actually specified here 2 more, but I don't think that anything we're doing negates additional fast charging to occur at parallel or angle parking.
Right, okay, cool. And with the decrease in the angle parking, have some of those, this is a whole of city, is it?
It is the area shown as on the street. So it excludes Square East, Main Street.
So has some of the decreases already happened?
No.
Okay.
So it doesn't include, sorry, these numbers don't include what's happened in stage 1 and 2.
Okay, because there's been decreases already.
Yep.
So.
And it doesn't include, if we talk about the CBD, anything within the ring, in a ring road, it only includes the streets that are shown on the design.
Okay, cool. So have we actually gone back to some of those places where we have taken the decreases and improved the look and actually tested that with the building owners and the retailers or hospitality sector that it's actually worked for them, i.e. Square East and Cuba?
Not that I'm aware of,
okay.
Sorry.
Okay. All right, and it leads into my last question is around the scope and your answers to questions by Councillor Naylor was, so we have an opportunity, and probably being led not only by council but the steering group, is to have a look maybe around that rescope or revision, because we are pulling up, in my understanding, we are pulling up perfectly good paving and cutting down perfectly established trees to get a look. Is that a fair summarisation of what because the look is, I've been told by some designers that it's got to be consistent right through, and I just challenge some of that thinking at times.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the streetscape plan overall is a consistent look throughout, and yes, in response to your question, that would be what we'd be attempting to do. And
just another one is on bottom of page 154, the main reduction in the amount of angle parking will happen on the sunny side, the south side of Broadway, and officers thinking, and consultants as well, have said because it will create a greater, wider pedestrian zone and retail spill-out zones. Has that been tested with retailers? Have they asked for that? Have building owners, have they asked for that, or is that some consultant?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, we haven't consulted with the building owners or the retailers around that, the usability of that space.
Okay, I'll leave them rest to comment. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I might just add a couple of questions here. So on page 156 of the papers, there's a table of the budget that's been allocated to this program, which totals to 26.6 million. The comment beneath that says a cost review has been undertaken and that indicates construction of circa 48 million, so a near doubling of the cost of this program. Am I reading that correctly? So through our long-term plan, we'll need to double the budget for this to achieve the work that's in front of us?
That is correct.
Okay. Along similar question, have we got any foot traffic measures from the areas that have been done, or any measures of success from the areas that have been done, so we can have confidence that it's working, that this program's working?
Not that I'm aware of, sorry.
So we don't know if there's more foot traffic or more. Okay. All right. Councillor Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions left for me. One is around table 2.7, page 151, which kind of gives us the history of this, or at least the recent history of it, and refers to council decision of June 2020 around the design of the entire Streets for People project. And just in reviewing the paper supporting that, the entire design that was indicated at that time included Main Street East and some things that, to my reading of the current paper, have fallen off. So can you just help us understand how and where those have fallen off and where they're at?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The reason that Square East, Main Street East, has fallen off or is not included in the designs at this particular point in time is around the bus terminal and the business case for the bus terminal. I would probably have to defer to David Murphy if on terms of timing for that, but it was felt that there was no point developing up a design for that bit of street if we didn't really know where the bus terminal was going to land. You'll also note that in the figure that we've shown there, we've also shown the inner square as being part of this project. It hasn't been developed as part of the design package either, for the exact same reason. What happens to regional buses, what happens to the terminal itself, and how that all functions.
Thank you. Could we get, and it is perhaps through you, Chair, to Mr. Murphy, and kind of where we're at in the bus hub, et cetera, space?
Yeah, so we've had some, as I said earlier in the committee meeting, we've had some more positive response from Waka Kotahi. So we're now entering the procurement phase for a city centre business case, which will be looking at the city centre in totality and the scope of the Streets for People project and the bus terminal. We've slightly extended the scope of the investigation for the bus terminal to include a slightly a broader area, coming back to Church Street and including the old police station. As the officers have said, until that it was felt that the design should be paused until that work's complete. So we anticipate that business case occurring throughout the duration of the next financial year.
Great, thank you. Secondary questions just around the changes in parking on street, and just wanted to understand what capacity there is in nearby streets in terms of utilization to absorb some of that, and as well in terms of off-street parking in terms of utilization to absorb some of that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we haven't gone out for consultation on it yet and haven't done the investigation into the capacity on the wider CBD. I think part of the business case for the central city will incorporate looking at car parking as well, the capacity throughout the day. So as part of this project, it hasn't been included yet.
Okay, so you're saying that we don't have data on parking utilization in the city centre?
We haven't gathered that information yet. We do have access to some of the data through the parking that we maintain, but the private car parks and off-street that is not part of our network, we won't have the data for. So we need to go a bit broader in the investigation.
Okay, thanks. And in that bit broader investigation, will there be kind of an assessment at which point we have a kind of tipping point where we'd say there is justification around investment in additional off-street parking?
I imagine there would be. I'd probably have to defer to David on that one.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So there has been some preliminary analysis undertaken, data captured for the preparation for the work for the parking framework. We've recently requested through the governance team a councillor workshop on that piece of work. We can present the material that we've got to date and have a discussion on the way forward for the parking framework. So that work was just paused while we recruited the senior transport planner role.
Thank you. And just to confirm, the scope of that conversation is both on and off-street parking?
Yes, it's be a citywide parking framework.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in regards to sightlines, I saw on the first, on page 161, as an example on Square West, that there is included slope grass seating space under 7, and 6 was an arbor and seating. I just wanted to understand the SEPTED safety elements of environmental design. Whether these garden beds, are they low, or they got some planting to screen, and like these raised seating elements around the sight lines being blocked? Can I get some comment around the principles of SEPTED and these elements in the design?
The planting, the seating and the raised areas are quite low. They're seatable sitting areas, sloping. So there wouldn't be a blockage of sight lines.
So quite low being, how high would quite low be?
400 mil off the ground, a typical seating height.
Okay, so and the seats on 6 as an example, they're equally only 600 off the ground?
400 off the ground, yes.
400 off the ground, oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's just your standard, there'll be the standard height seating that we see around the CBD now, just done in a slightly different way.
And then this is probably a detail, but I would be interested in this early step where you mentioned that some of the zones might be distinctive through use of colour, and yet I see the incorporated rangatane design on the city east with some colour, but nowhere else in the plans. Can I just understand what your thinking is when you term that you're distinctive colour?
I mean, we are still working with rangatane. So,
okay.
So Square East, what you see in Square East was developed up because there was the desire to tender that section and get that underway. So we worked quite extensively with rangatane, 12 months ago to get that looking the way it is now. This is a 60% design. There is still conversations and design work happening with rangatane, but also, so we'll be seeing some of that, I guess probably the wrong word, but flavour coming into the design. But also, we have been talking about using colour as a distinctive between where we are in different parts of the spaces. At the moment, we've got the canary yellow on Square East. We may look at doing something different in Broadway, but again, I mean, that's sort of the level of detail we're still working through.
Okay, thank you. Cheers. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions, Jeff and Hamish. Thank you. Just so I've got some, so we've got some understanding of the parking reduction of 108 parks. Can you give us an understanding of the percentage difference between what we currently have now and what will be there in the future?
It's about 33% reduction.
Thank you. And just in terms of Broadway, how many parks are likely to lose along that south side?
Sorry, I haven't done the breakdown in Broadway itself.
Okay. So now I'm just trying to get a feel for, obviously this is going up for public consultation, so just getting a feel for that. And the other question I've got there, just in terms of paragraph 410, page 154, there's some discussion there around increase in cycle security points. Do we have an understanding of what that's going to look like for the city in terms of quantum change?
No, I haven't. Sorry, I haven't counted them up, but there would be probably a doubling of the facilities that are currently there. I don't think each one of those cycle stands would be e-chargeable, but a good portion of those would be.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Mr Chair.
Councillor Zabellin.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you both. I'm just on page 150 at paragraph 2.4. Just mentioned there that we have no overarching business case for this program. I'm just wondering if we've got a city centre framework and we've got the city centre streetscape plan, so I'm wondering what's different about the business case to those existing documents.
Yes, so they were, I guess, strategic planning documents prepared by the council at the time that have led to the development of these programs, the 2016 Streetscape Plan. I think what we have, I guess, learnt in more recent times and made a bit of a switch in our focus is to make sure that all of our transport planning is bringing Waka Kotahi with us on the journey. So I think, that particular paragraph relates quite closely to the topic that we considered prior to this item. So we are now starting to have conversations with Waka Kotahi about the better business case funding process that they have to help secure co-funding for these types of projects. And as I said earlier, we've just recently secured co-funding for a city centre business case, including the bus terminal. So that's a good step forward towards, in the future, securing or an indication towards taking the right steps towards securing co-investment into these types of projects.
So sort of having business cases loaded and ready to go indicates that we're ready to go as soon as any funding comes to the table?
Any funding from Waka Kotahi for these types of projects requires a business case.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr Chair.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Am I on yet?
You are.
Right. Couple of questions to the staff, please. How many car parks are going to be lost around the council building itself? Could you tell me or estimate for me, please?
Through Mr Chair, no car parks around the council building itself. We are not including Square West, the road from Church Street to Main Street West is not included in the works because it's considered to be done already.
Okay, so all the car parks and outside the library and stuff will be staying there?
Through you, Mr Chair, that's north of Main Street West, so it is included in the project.
So how many of the car parks there? Because a lot of people would park there, would they not, to do business with council?
Through you, Mr Chair, I'm unable to answer the question. I don't know the numbers of specific changes of car parks in the street.
Okay. Now, we're losing approximately a third of the car parks in the square. Could you tell me why you've lowered the amount of loading bays too, from 15 to 9?
Again, through you, Mr Chair, is trying to balance out parking, loading, access for all the different users that we have. And also increase the ability of people to move around the square. So I guess it's a balance, and that is an impact of trying to reach that balance.
So do you think local businesses in the CBD will be suffering because there are less loading zones for couriers and stuff to use?
I can't make a comment on the businesses, sorry.
Okay. No. I'll leave my rest of the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Hamish. That comes to the end of our questions. We'll now move on to the motion itself. Oh, apologies. Councillor Arnott, you've just jumped into the queue. Is that to speak, or is that, were you wanting a question? Okay. All right, we're having some technical difficulty, so I'll read it out. So the recommendation to council is that 1, council adopt the terms of reference for the Central City Transformation Project Steering Group, attachment 1, 2, that Council approve the Mayor's recommendation for membership of the Central City Transformation Project Steering Group, that being the Mayor, Councillors Harpiter, Bowen, Dennison and Hancock. 3, that the Council receive the 60% detailed design plans, brackets developed design, for the entire Central City Transformation, Streets for People, project area, attachment 2. And 4, the Council delegate authority to the Chief Executive to vary the GST exclusive contract sum of contract 3923, professional services designed for the city centre streetscape upgrade, by $254,000, noting that this will increase the contingency of the project from $96,000 to $350,000, and that this increase can be accommodated within the existing budget within Programme 212. I look to the floor for a mover. Councillor Barrett, and a second to Councillor Bowen. Councillor Barrett, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly happy to endorse this way forward. I think it sets out an appropriate structure and pace to get this long-term investment in the heart of the city well executed on behalf of council. So I'm more than happy to endorse the establishment of a steering group to take that forward. Appreciate that there are some ongoing conversations around what the implications are, and I think that that steering group can help work through those implications as plans continue to develop. But fundamentally, we do need to continue the investment in renewing and improving the heart of our city. The city does continue growing, and we do need to ensure that we pursue that in a strategic way that prioritizes livability, including livability and living in the heart of the city alongside work and play components. And that's fundamentally what this project is about, is ensuring city center vitality. And I would encourage members to consider that city center vitality is not a one-to-one correlation with on-street car parking. As cities grow, things do need to migrate and move, and what we see cities do over and over again to solve this is they migrate those opportunities from on-street parking to off-street parking so that you can get better utilization and activation of space in the city center. So we'll just ask that people bear that in mind in their comments and look forward to hearing from colleagues on this.
Thank you, councillors. I'm going to speak next on this. Streets for People has been, to put it bluntly, a disaster, an unequivocal disaster. Millions have been spent with the goals of increasing foot traffic, making our city more walkable, supporting businesses, making our city look nicer. What we've heard today is that there's been no measure of whether the foot traffic has increased. There's been no discussion with the businesses whether they're benefited. The Mayor asked, have you spoken to the businesses or shop owners? Well, to your question, Mr. Mayor, I have. I went and visited every single one of them last week when this agenda item came on our agenda. I hope you found over my time on council, I'm not an unreasonable person. I'm open to changing my mind. I went to every single store there and I said, hey, we've got an item coming up about Streets for People. How have you found it? This is on the section of road opposite the plaza on the corner square. I said, how have you found it? I didn't say, I think it's terrible, what do you think? I asked an open question because I wanted a genuine feeling from what they were experiencing. And what was the feedback I got? I got the feedback that there's been numerous customer complaints because if they park on that section of road, they can't get out because it's become so congested since we removed the left-hand turning lane. I've got complaints that customers who only have a half an hour lunch break, they don't have time to get into town, park and then spend 10 minutes trying to get out while also having an opportunity to buy a coffee or some sushi or a book. I've heard complaints that all that's been achieved by adding the benches on the street is youth crime for the simple fact that 5 metres across the road we have one of the largest centre city squares in the country, and why on earth would you want to eat your lunch on the side of the road rather than in the beautiful grass square that we have quite literally across the road? They said that there's been massive congestion as a result of the reduced parking and the numbers of people that are going through there, and I myself and a number of people simply won't drive down that section of road anymore because it becomes so congested and difficult to use. But they're just business owners. What about the rest of the community? I mean, of course, they're just being grumpy business owners. What about the rest of the community? Some of you, when I mention parking, you roll your eyes at me and say, oh, well, William doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, you must not receive the emails I do. So for your benefit and for our officers and everybody in the chamber, I'm going to read the emails that I receive. One person said, I do not know anyone that agrees with this proposed transport change. Ultimately, to get people out of their cars, which is in fact not an option for most mothers. We cannot walk everywhere with our kids, toddlers, babies, or pile onto a bus, which I might add ends pretty early in the evening, so isn't appropriate. Another person said, it's a great way to kill small businesses, many who are already struggling. And I know, let's make it harder for those with disabilities and the elderly, of which I'm heading there fast. Another person said, I find it odd that the PNCC wants Palmerston North to be an age-friendly city, but most of what's proposed for older folk like me can only be described as age-unfriendly. And as a caveat there, not everybody who's aged and has trouble walking has a disability sticker. In fact, most of them do not. To get a disability sticker, you need to have a diagnosed, a clinical disability. Most of our elderly population just have trouble walking. My grandma, she can't get over 100 metres, but she doesn't have a sticker in her car. So saying, oh, we've increased the number of disability parks is not a solution to the challenge that most of our people face. Here's another one. I object to the removal of car parks. It discourages people from shopping in the central city as a barrier for the elderly, disabled and those with young children. The work done on the road and the footpath opposite the plaza has had a negative effect in my view. I no longer attempt to visit any of those shops, nor those on Cuba Street. The tables are in a very exposed, windy position and have a very low occupancy rate. Another said, it severely disadvantages all of those disabled. If people can't park close to shops, it will affect businesses who will lose customers who are struggling enough after COVID. The convenience of being able to park where you need to shop for appointments, the time pressures workers face, and the limited time not being able to do what they need and have to walk a mile to get there. I'm sorry, councillors, that I get passionate about this, but this is the feedback that we get. Of those business owners, there was one positive comment. And one business owner who'd moved from Broadway to that section of the plaza said, oh yeah, it looks a bit nicer. That was it. Of all the comments, one said, it looks a bit nicer. We as a council even sat here just a couple of weeks ago and talked about removing the benches that we put in because of the increase in youth crime they've had. This is a sobering program. To have a report here that says we're going to double the budget to remove a third of our city centre's car parks is outright horrifying. I agree with Councillor Barrett. If we had a program that went alongside this, said we're going to build a car parking building and increase the capacity of car parks in the square, I might be able to sit here today and support this. But we don't. And I really can't just sit here and trust that, oh, well, one might come someday. This program has been going on for many, many years now, and clearly the provision of off-street parking has not been a priority in the development of this plan. There have been no measures of success in terms of what's been done, which in the years that this has been, some of these streets have been open, nobody's thought to ask the business owners, nobody's thought to measure the footpath usage and see if it has actually had this increase. Footpaths limit walking when the streets are so congested that you can't walk down it. Places like Times Square, London, Wellington, Auckland. If you go for a walk around the square, our footpaths are not so congested that they need to be widened to get people to use them. That is not the reason people aren't using their footpaths, because they don't have an extra half a metre. That's not the problem that we're facing. So what's the alternative? Because I am not in the position of opposing things with no alternative. Councillors, I ask you today, support me in voting against this, and I will not today, because it would be shooting, well, not shooting from the, I've been thinking about this for a while, but it wouldn't be appropriate, but I will put forward a notice of motion that we as a council scrap the Streets for People program and develop a new program of work focused on upgrading the underground infrastructure that needs to be upgraded, because I recognise we have pipes under there that are far too old and not functional, and upgrading the footpaths that currently exist so that we do end up with a nicer looking CBD. But we do not need to go down this path. There is an alternative, councillors. I know some of you will say, oh, well, how dare you say this before we've gone to public consultation? Well, I hope I've just shown you there the community have already spoken and have spoken very loudly about how horrified they are by this piece of work that we are putting forward. I get very passionate about this because it is deeply impactful to a number of people. We have frightened our community with the work we've done, and I am not prepared to vote in favour of furthering that work at this stage or at any stage. There is another way. I recognise that it may be difficult, but please, I urge you, vote against this, work with me, and let's come up with a plan that will work for our city centre, not one that will kill our city centre. The Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, councillors, I'm going to support this, and there's some real critical reasons why. And we just have to be careful we're not gaslighting some stuff here and going down some rabbit holes. Councillors, we need more oversight on this project. That's a clear thing that's been identified by the questions, by the report we've received, and even some of the negative comments. So it's about more oversight. Are we ticking this off, just saying, yep, let's just do it, 48 million, let's just blindly go ahead? No, we're not. Parts of the CBD, let's be really honest, in Central City are tired. But not everything's broken. So I question around the rescope, the revision. We're chopping out some native trees, which are perfectly good. We're pulling up tarmac, which is perfectly good. We're ripping up some pavers, which are perfectly good. I just want to double check and question why we're doing that. The business case, the plans were developed 8 years ago. Time's moved on. Even 4 to 5 years ago, the budgets were done. Time's moved on. The designs were done with everything in the plan, and to be really honest, somewhat overtaken by the consultants. Hence, again, we're coming up with this 48 million. I'm not advocating for that at all, but we do, like some of our other things, we do need an overall plan. We just can't blindly go ahead and just say, oh, we're putting more parking in there and we're going to limit the footpaths in some places. We've got to have a plan. So the only way we're going to do that is to have some sort of Streets for People project. Is everything we're seeing in this report we're going to do, is it right? No, it isn't, but it's got to have some balance. I do agree with some of the commentary around parking and safety, but I also agree with some of the commentary about vibrancy. I've just been to Missoula and Wageningen, and they're two great examples of where they balance the movement of vehicles and people, and they go at different times of the day and night. I don't think everything's been a disaster. Could we have done it better? Yes. Again, not trying to blame anybody, but we did have some consultants and some officers that are not here now just blindly go ahead with some of this work. Did they double check with the landowners? Did they double check with even us? So I think we can do better in that space. So we do need to test it, but we've got to be careful that we just don't go in there and ask a whole lot of questions straight after a safety issue or a parking issue, because you're going to get a flavoured response. I think this needs to be done in context to what we're trying to do over the whole Central City. Great step from the officers, and really looking forward to the good step we've made with the bus terminal. That is another thing which does need to be sorted. I've been around this table now 10 years, and I think all of you have, there's been some toing and throwing with the bus terminal. So that's great that we've got some funding planned for that. But we need to be careful too that we're doing the right thing for the city, and we're not just chasing a funder, because we've seen what's happened with the Saddle and Turanga, because you can get led down a pathway. It's got to be right for us and right for our city. So, councillors, please, this is about balance. We're not picking just don't make it a winner or loser thing. This is around trying to transform our city centre. The steering group will, if I'm involved in it, will be challenging the officers and the consultants around the scope and the vision of what we're trying to do. There's some perfectly good paving out there which doesn't need to be totally ripped up. There's some perfectly good trees which don't need to be chopped down because an urban designer or a consultant thinks it doesn't match. We've got to challenge that. Even out here, we're going to remove public sculpture. How's that going to go down? Not that good. But it's all about balance. So we've got to give this a try. If we don't, we're just closing ourselves off. So please, you've got to support this. It'll still come back to us for other decisions, a little bit like some of the other reports we've had today. So, please, you've got to have an open mind about some of this stuff. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I'm actually going to support this. Again, look, there are going to be some points of contention in terms of what's been presented. Particularly, there will be some house of rage, I guess, around sort of the reduction in street parking. But the point is that this is being prepared for consultation. It's a starting point, not an end point. and the plans are only completed to a point of being 60% complete at this point in time. So we're not, again, fastened to this plan as it stands currently. And the consultation with stakeholders in the wider community will help shape the final plan. It's not up to us at this point in time to actually then try and shape what it's going to look like here and now. As the Mayor has said, the steering group will add another layer of support to the program and some oversight to make sure that what we do come back with finally before Council will be something which has the major approval of the community itself. And I suppose just to close, and I will stay within my 5 minutes talking time, is that investment to the CBD is absolutely important to the vitality of our city. What it looks like, what it feels like, the user experience is very, very important. And I guess there are many, many examples right around the globe where cities have actually failed to invest in their CBDs, the beating heart of their cities, and they have experienced urban decay. And with urban decay, we get unsafe communities. So it's very, very important that we continue this journey and we try and pick up the public and the stakeholders and take them with us on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'm a little bit in two minds about how I vote on this. I think I agree with the Mayor that it would be helpful for there to be some better oversight of this program, including elected members. However, I also think what the plans that are in front of us do need significant change, and I think the Mayor has alluded to that also. However, the terms of reference that are included in our papers outline quite clearly that this steering group is about ensuring the successful delivery of the city centre streetscape plan, and then under the delegations makes it clear that the group does not hold any delegations and has no authority to make decisions. So that the decisions that guide the path forward for this really need to sit in this room and will sit in this room ultimately. So any interaction that the steering group has with officers will hold very little impact unless this room supports them. I have expressed my concerns about this program right from the outset, for many years actually, because I haven't been comfortable with the level of expenditure considering the priorities across the city for investment elsewhere. My suggestion has always been that we upgrade the areas when they need renewal. And I think the Mayor mentioned earlier about digging up perfectly good pavement, and I'm certainly not comfortable with digging up perfectly good pavement when we've got significant competing priorities across the city. Ultimately, the 48 million worth of implementation, well, that's what it's been estimated at this point, will be something that we debate next year during our long-term plan deliberations. I've always expressed a level of discomfort around us doing the design work for all stages when we're unsure at this point if and when we'll deliver them all and how far away that might be. It may be years till we deliver the last ones of these. So the design work may be well outdated by then. So I'm a little bit, I won't be supporting the fourth recommendation. I have expressed concern around the amount that we're designing that is well ahead of our ability to deliver or implement in a timely way. So in terms of I'm happy to support the steering group, but I think we need to realise that we've got to give this direction from this room. So I'm not comfortable to support the third recommendation at this point, even though it is only to receive the plans, because I think we do need to find an opportunity, if we're not comfortable with the plans as they are set out currently, to give some clearer direction around this program. I've appreciated the officers engaging with the Disability Reference Group, but as I alluded to in the questions, the feedback from this group, I do not see applied to the designs at this stage, or very little of that. I'm pleased that there is an increase, but 22 disability parks is still only 10%. And the view of that group is that if there are a quarter of our city with a disability, why are we only having 10% of the parks, particularly when the rationale around reduced parking is that fully abled people can walk or cycle to get to that area. So I think we need to think about, actually, is 10% disability parks adequate? I don't think it is. And when most of those parks have the potential for opening wheelchairs into the flow of traffic on the street, and that's been a significant concern that the group has passed on, to only have one park in the CBD that's a parallel park, I don't think goes far enough to addressing the needs of those who are disabled in our city. And that's just specific around the accessibility areas, but I think looking at the design work, I think there's a lot of stuff in there that probably costs a lot of money that perhaps contributes to that $48 million that I don't think is necessary to include all of those attributes. So I'll be voting for the steering group, but against 3 and 4.
Councillor Finlay, just bear with us while we get you on the screen. When you're ready.
Okay. Well, where do I start? For years, we've been talking about trying to get our CBD alive and encourage people to get into the CBD and liven it up. But here we go, we've got a plan that's going to do the exact opposite, in my view. It was good that the Disability Reference Group was consulted and they've talked to them. But they didn't come to the older person's reference group, though. That's interesting. Because older people don't have the disabilities, but they do have limited ability to walk around. But mind you, we're going to have some pretty flash footpaths for them not to walk on. Comments were made about safety and that sort of thing. I noticed probably the most unsafe part of our CBD at the moment is the part we've already done up. There's so much violence and crime going on there at the moment. We should think maybe we did that wrong. And of course, as far as traffic flow, where's the worst traffic flow in the city? Right outside the park we've done up. We've got a council building and a library. We're going to take away parking, so our ratepayers are going to have less ability to come in and see us about things or pay our rates or whatever. If you notice the library, even at night, there's very limited available parking, and we're going to take a third of the parking away from them. Maybe we need to move the library as well. Or maybe we need to move the CBD. We're taking a third of the parks away. Now, that's a third of the cars that are not going to come into the square or have to go somewhere else. Now, I wonder how many of the local small businesses in the CBD are going to manage to survive losing a third of their customers, or unless they catch the buses or start cycling. But I know the older people won't be because they can't. But never mind, who cares about the older people, I suppose? We're going to have these fancy doodah footpaths, the best footpaths in the city probably, with 1/3 less people using them than what they do now. That makes sense, I suppose. And of course, it's obvious to me that someone sees that a lot of the small businesses will be moving on because the loading zones are being chopped by about a third as well. Now, loading zones are the ones that where couriers and vans and stuff drop off supplies to these small shops and retailers. So maybe they're not going to be there to use them anymore. I think we're going to be doing the exact opposite with this plan. We're going to be chasing retailers out of our CBD. Have you seen Hamilton? Well, if we go on with this plan, that CBD will be very much like Hamilton because everybody else will be moving out of the CBD and people won't be coming to use our fancy CBD anymore, and it will become a crime centre. And I am going to vote against this because I think it's totally wrong. We need to look back and start again. We need to encourage people to come to our CBD, not discourage them, because this plan is going to discourage people dramatically. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Chair. I'm supporting the recommendations and moving forward. This has been a long-term commitment of this council to refresh, not just like with like, because actually if you look back at what we've got currently, is really off the history of horse and carts and era, without no thought about streetscape and infrastructure. It was just wide carriageways on a grid section that Mr. Stewart designed back in 1866. And so when the car wasn't even invented until the early 1900s, and all we've got is just infrastructure around wide streets with the horse and cart era, and nothing's been adjusted for a city of the future. This is 50-year infrastructure we're investing in now, and the city's not going to be the same as it wasn't. We're quite different than 50 years ago or more, and we've got to vision our city as being 50 years ahead from now. And why would we just put like with like infrastructure in? That is so short-sighted in my view. And so therefore, the multinodal type of transport options that will come in the future are quite real. The population's going to grow in itself. You know, currently we're in the 90,000s. We're not going to have a car for everybody to park outside their desired shop. Our city's going to grow over 100,000 and beyond in that time frame, and so I just think the vision of it just seems very short-sighted with the slap in the face of the work done to date on this. And so if it's just the car parking that's the major concern, I'm very comfortable that we're designing it in a city that has more people staying for longer, walking and dining out on the sunny side of the street and things like that. That is trends globally that people are wanting to do, and we'll see more of that here. I appreciate the disruption. You can't build omelettes without breaking eggs, and certainly when we did the streetscape in stage 1 and 2, there was disruption for those business owners, and when we did it in 2 stages, that caused a double load on that. And it's been unfortunate that since then we've gone through COVID, so it's been hard to measure the foot traffic in real terms on what the benefits have been when we've had those lockdowns and disruption to businesses. And on the back of the cost of living and all the other trends that are happening in this recent year, I can appreciate businesses are feeling that. People are feeling it, and the youth consequences of some of their congregation around this inner city, we're not alone in that. There's other centres that have had trouble with that, and that's, you could work out, I'm not going to make the assumption of where those problems have come out of. But they do exist, and I acknowledge them. But that doesn't mean that we need to stay the same. I'm fully committed on this. This has been a long-term project, a vision for the city. The groundwork's been done, and I'm not going to throw the best part of hundreds of thousands of dollars out with the bathwater saying that people just want to have the same straitjacket with the wide lapels and bell bottoms that we had in the 60s. Because I think people actually want a city of the future. They want Palmerston North to look forward, and myself, I'm prepared to invest in that. And what this is doing is putting the working party for the transformational project in place, or the steering group. We will have councillor input on each stage of it, and ultimately we're going to sign it off an annual plan budget, so we need to have a level of comfort around it. But the fundamental elements that make up this plan are well subscribed, well known. This is not a new project, and we've had people feedback on this. When we did the City Heart project, there were some reservations in the early 2000s. Now try and find somebody that thinks that project isn't a success. That project is very much a success, and this equally is the second part of that, of modernising and transforming our inner city centre. And I believe the fruits of it, you can't judge it on one stretch of road on that project. This is going to take a multi-year approach, and I'm all for it. Thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And like yourself, I've also canvassed many retailers around town, and as an ex-retailer myself, don't like any of this. I won't be supporting anything. Cost. You know, there's a lot of buildings around this city, council buildings that need earthquake strengthening or have got leaky roofs. Loss of loading bays, ridiculous for retailers. Loss of car parks, not good, anti-business. You know, we've got the safety aspect that's already been mentioned. Closing of roads, angle parks, not good at all. You know, lack of consultation to date with retailers or public. You know, nobody's going to like this. Nobody does. You know, my view is if it's not broken, don't fix it. And stage 1 or 2, I didn't think was broken either. It was fixed, and then it was broken. Outside the plaza entrance, initially the loss of the right-hand turn onto the square didn't work, reinstated, extra cost. Going the other way, heading towards the plaza, loss of the extra lane for turning. You know, I regularly see traffic backed up through that roundabout. You know, at the time when that was being done, Dave Edmonds from Bruce Watt Photography was in the Manawatu Evening Standard a few times, telling how it was affecting and hurting his business. Now, I worked for Dave for 10 years. Sadly, he's not there anymore. Yeah, like I said, I won't be supporting any of this, and not good. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your impassioned comments on this. I'm very glad you didn't get through the other 80,000 residents of Palmerston North. Just a few, I will support this absolutely wholeheartedly. Yeah, some of our CBD, this central part of the city is not just tired, but actually dangerous. The footpaths around some, particularly the footpaths on Square Side, are actually not fit for purpose. We're not always talking about ripping up perfectly good footpaths. They're not perfectly good. They should have been done many years ago. So I support a strong link to a renewals programme. Some of these renewals have been deferred, and that needs to come together into this work. I support, and have all the way through, supported a need to do the design for the whole plan. This is a conversation we keep having, and I think the Mayor alluded to this. We need the overarching plan. We need master plans to direct investment and to see how the whole system will work together when it's done. So it's no surprise, or it should be no surprise to anybody, that there are particular issues with the one bit that we have done, because we haven't done the bits that make that bit work. Of course there are problems with traffic congestion when people continue to try to use that piece of the square, as they always have done, when the point of that design was to discourage people from just using that as a channel to get across the city. The point of that design was to put cars onto the ring road if they weren't coming into the central city. And so I absolutely take the comment that it's not working well at the moment. It won't work well until we get the whole thing up and done. And that's unfortunate. Unfortunate is probably a bad word for it. You know, it's inconvenient to our ratepayers, to our citizens. It's inconvenient to those businesses. I absolutely accept that, but that doesn't mean we stop. It means we push through, in my view. So I like the idea of the steering group. I've not always been in favour of us having steering groups, and I think there is a tension in that, I think as Councillor Naylor pulled out, that the decision-making sits in this chamber, and there needs to be strong linkage between the views expressed round the table, the diversity of those views, as reflected into that steering group. But I feel like with the terms of reference proposed, we can achieve that balance, so I'm comfortable with that. So I think I'd just caution us at this point to rely on evidence in this decision-making rather than anecdata. The evidence shows internationally that where we encourage people to walk more in the central city, that actually supports retail activity. There is strong evidence in New Zealand and internationally that the more people walk in their central city, the more they spend. The best thing we can do for our retailers is to get people walking past their shops. So I take all of the commentary about where will people park and how will we get them there. Absolutely, there's a lot to be worked through, but there is no reason at this stage to stop. There is every reason to push on because this is a multi-generational investment and we need to get it right.
Councillor Barrett, for your right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks everyone for what has been a extended and very interesting debate to observe. In closing, I'd implore you all to keep the big picture in mind here. It is about a multi-decade vision as we look ahead, and it's about ensuring that we do revitalize the heart of our city so that it is future ready, so that it is there for people who want to live in the heart of our city, work in the heart of our city, play in the heart of our city, and yes, shop in the heart of our city. And as has just been recently pointed out by Councillor Bowen, the evidence is overwhelming that you need to invest in the heart if you want that heart to be strong, and you need to do it in a way that keeps places activated and thriving and not keeping them as extended parking lots. So yes, things will need to change. I very much support the comments coming from the Mayor in terms of ensuring an appropriate level of oversight, thinking about the balance that comes through there as those plans do get refined. And I have every confidence in the steering group that's being named here to do the work on their side before bringing for approval and actual decisions back to the Chamber a way forward. I rather suspect that if we went down the notice of motion track that the chairs alluded to, we might end up in a very similar position. It would take a couple of years to get there, of course, because we need to go right back to DOT. Well, that would be a tremendous waste of the actual investment that we've already put here that has brought us to a well-positioned place to ensure that we have a good balance of community input through a steering group and council decision-making to actually ensure that we deliver the revitalization of the heart of our city. And I would just finally close by saying, actually, some things are working very, very well in Square East, and you might just think about Safari Group. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. We're going to split this into two separate recommendations, but before we do that, I believe David has a quick clarification to make.
Yeah, just a minor point. Our eagle-eyed governance team picked up on page 160 of the terms of reference for the Central City Transformation Steering Group that it would report back to the Strategy and Planning Committee every 6 months. That would be the Economic Growth Committee. So we'll just make that change if it doesn't need any formality.
Thank you, David. So just to clarify to the committee, we're now going to vote on recommendations 1 and 2, then we'll vote on recommendations 3 and 4 together. Are we all happy with that? Right. I'll ask you to vote for the first 2 of the recommendations. Thank you, Hannah. That is passed 9 votes in favour and 3 against. We'll now move to the next item, which is on next recommendations, which is recommendation 3 and 4. That has passed, 7 votes in favour and 5 votes against. Now, councillors, we've got 3 more items on the agenda, and although I'd like to think that we might get through them quite quickly, I have a feeling we won't, given we've got street infill lighting in there and our economic report that I'm sure we want to ask a number of questions about. So I think it might be best that we break for lunch for an hour and we return at 1:20 past. Thank you.